Is there going to be food in this house today or not? The father of the household inquired loudly and indignantly. Honey, but we just had dinner. Kate looked at her husband in surprise as he sat in front of the empty plate, spoon in hand, and looked at her expectantly. She had fed the whole family a modest dinner and was determined not to understand exactly what was required of her. The children had long since eaten and gone to their rooms to do their own things. So it was dinner? Sergio asked mockingly. And I thought there should be some meat in dinner, at least in a man's dinner. You can do with a cabbage leaf for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I'm the one who works and brings money into the family. And, as it seemed to me, I had the right to count on normal food for that money. Bit her lip. She realized, belatedly, that the old story was beginning again. The same old story that repeated itself every time the month came to an end. Each time her husband approached this conversation differently from the last. That was why the woman didn't immediately realize what he meant. She sighed heavily. She didn't want to start this useless argument again, which would only lead to another quarrel and nothing more. She had heard all of Sergio's arguments many times before and had answered them many times with her own, but the couple had never been able to come to an agreement. Kate was sure of it. Neither of them had come up with anything new, which meant that the continuation of this conversation would be as pointless as before. Nevertheless, she knew her husband was waiting for her answer, and keeping silent wasn't an option either. She had tried this tactic 2 or 3 times before, and it had not worked for her. Sergio, Kate began gently, we have discussed this many times. Should we start this again? It's worth it, her husband interrupted her firmly. We're going to have this conversation until things change. Or, to be more precise, until you get your act together and get a job. I can't keep dragging you all around my neck forever, after all. Kate splashed her hands. Honey, how can I go to work? They won't take the younger ones to daycare. There's no room anywhere yet. We won't have enough money for a nanny even if I get a job somewhere. But others somehow manage without any nannies. So others have grandparents, sisters and brothers, someone else. But we have no one. I'm an orphan. And your parents won't even take care of the kids for half a day so I can get a part-time job. Don't put this on my parents again. They raise their own kids and they don't have to take care of yours. Kate froze in place, even stopping to wash the dishes, which she had begun to do during this awkward conversation. The word alone hurt her, as if her husband had hit her. She was not sure, however, that a physical blow would not have come out less painful. What do you mean with mine? She exclaimed. These are ours. What do you mean with mine? She exclaimed. They are our children. You wanted them as much as I did, didn't you? Sergio smirked in a very wicked way. I wanted to, but I didn't want to, he said. We didn't agree that I would have to carry the whole lot on my back. I thought that you would sit on maternity leave for a while, and then, like all normal people, go back to work. And since you're a housewife now, the children are your responsibility, and I have nothing to do with them. Kate felt as if someone was squeezing her throat with strong fingers. These statements were something new. Sergio had never made such statements before. Yes, he complained that he had to feed his family alone. Yes, he had lamented that on his salary, which, to put it bluntly, was not particularly large, his wife could not provide him with what he thought he needed. But he had never yet claimed that their shared children had nothing to do with him. Sergio, on the other hand, as if reading her thoughts and certainly seeing her condition perfectly well, decided, it seems, to finally finish his wife off. And as for the younger ones, with which you so actively covering your laziness, he said, so I'm not sure that it is from me. I worked all day while you were on maternity leave. There's no telling who might have been visiting you during that time. Of course, Kate couldn't bear such unfair accusations any longer, choking with tears, practically unable to see the way. She rushed out of the kitchen and, not realizing how it happened, found herself in the nursery. 6-year-old Alex was looking after his younger brother and sister and looked up at her in surprise. Mom? He asked in an unusually serious tone for his age. What happened? Nothing, son. Everything is fine. Kate, belatedly realizing her mistake, tried to discreetly wipe away her tears. The boy looked at her carefully, then shifted his gaze to the younger children and nodded slowly. Obviously, he decided that his mother didn't want to disturb the little ones, which was why she was trying to pretend that everything was fine. Kate didn't bother to dissuade him, but just quietly left the room, closing the door behind her. She hoped that the next day Alex would have more important things to do, and he wouldn't remember the incident. The woman had no idea where to go with her grief. There were only 2 rooms in their apartment, a child's room and an adult's room. And in the second one, her husband could come at any moment. She didn't want to see him right now. Besides, she suspected that he would not give up his favorite subject so easily and would continue to drive her with his remarks. There was only one way out to leave the apartment despite the late hour. Of course, leaving the children virtually alone was not the best solution. On the other hand, in such a state it would obviously not be able to interact with them normally. So whether there's a wall in the apartment or not doesn't really matter. The younger ones would be left in Alex's care anyway. At least Kate had no doubt that he would put them to bed properly, and he himself would go to bed on time. Her son, responsible beyond his years, loved to play with his brother and sister. Of course, the woman tried not to allow the children to stay alone for long. But when Lesha took to tutor the younger ones in her presence, she saw that he coped with them perfectly. Yes, she was definitely lucky to have a son, and at the moment that was the only consolation she had. She wandered aimlessly down the street, hardly looking around, not even noticing the rain that had started, small and nasty. All her thoughts were centered on one single question: how she had reached such a life, how happy she was. Had her youthful love ended with her husband openly accusing her of infidelity without any reason? Kate remembers how they met. She is a young economics student at one of the country's leading universities. He was a promising young entrepreneur. Together they seemed to others, and to themselves, to be a perfect couple. Their relationship was like a romantic fairy tale. Courtship, gifts, restaurants, huge gorgeous bouquets of flowers. Both of them were waiting for a great future, and hardly anyone could imagine the poverty and doom in which these people found themselves now. And this fall began, perhaps, at the very moment when Sergio began to persistently persuade his future wife to leave the institute. "Why would you do that? What is it?" he asked. "My income is enough for 2 people. You will stay at home, cook, clean, raise children, after all." At first, Kate flatly refused to even hear about it. Brought up in an orphanage, who had every chance to be at the very bottom of her life, she was incredibly diligent and somehow miraculously managed to break into decent society and now held on to this opportunity with all her might. However, in the end, Sergio managed to convince the girl that now this brave new world is not going anywhere from her anyway. And at first everything was really good. Kate, as Sergio had planned, was doing household chores in their shared house while he was doing his business. They even had enough money in excess. Nevertheless, for some reason it did not work out to postpone. There were always some optional but pleasant things that I wanted to buy right now, and perhaps none of them thought then that any savings were needed. "If anything happens, my parents will help us," Sergio assured his young wife when she timidly started a conversation on this topic. You know, they don't live in poverty with me. Kate still didn't know if he believed what he was saying at the time or was lying to her, confident that that very critical situation would never happen. Anyway, after a while something happened to his business. Kate, without going into details, admitted only that over time he began to make less and less profit until eventually he completely collapsed. And at that moment it turned out that Sergio's parents were not going to provide any help to the young family. "Besides you, we also have younger children who have not yet got back on their feet. And you are already an adult man and you have to deal with your problems on your own," his father told him. Then they had to sell the luxurious large apartment in which they lived and move into a small 2-room apartment on the very outskirts of the city. Surprisingly, Alexander himself was most dissatisfied with this arrangement. Apparently, it was the fact that he had spent his whole life in luxury, and now he was forced to drag out a rather miserable existence. Kate reacted to this with philosophical calmness. Of course, she also managed to wean herself from a poor life, but still, once the girl led it, and therefore she was more prepared for various difficulties and knew exactly what to do in such conditions. Pretty quickly, she found a job, got a job in a store as a saleswoman. The salary, of course, was modest, but it's still better than nothing. She didn't see any other options for herself anyway. Sergio chose a completely different way to solve problems. He went on a long-term binge. Kate didn't blame her husband for anything. Everything happens in life. On the contrary, as a decent wife, she tried to inspire, calm, and support him. And, in the end, her efforts were successful. Sergio stopped drinking and started developing new business ideas that would allow their family to return to their former wealth and prosperity. However, there was always something wrong with these ideas. Even if it was possible to accumulate some initial amount and start a new business, all sorts of difficulties arose quite quickly, and the longer it all went on, the more unbearable the man's character became. "I don't have enough money to fully implement my projects," he told Kate frankly. "But what can I do, honey?" she replied. "I'm already taking all the extra shifts I can. I work almost 7 days a week. I just have nowhere to take the time to earn even more. Of course, if I had graduated, it would have been much easier. But what is there to regret now? This situation should serve as a lesson for both of us. I still need to finish my studies and find a normal job. Besides, as I said, savings will be needed. But these are, of course, plans for the time when we get out of this. How are we going to get out?" Her husband was indignant. "You're not helping me with this at all. But I'm really doing everything I can," Kate replied in surprise. "No," her husband objected with obvious irritation in his voice. "Not everything. There are some things you haven't done, even though I've repeatedly explained to you how important it is for me and for yourself. Honey, you seem to forget that although I did not receive a full education, I still studied economics for 2 years. What you're suggesting is absolute madness. Maybe you'll finally start trusting me in matters where I do understand something? You just don't believe in me." Alexander replied in a frustrated voice, "You think that since I made a mistake once, now I will repeat them all the time, and nothing else will ever work out for me. After such statements, Kate, of course, immediately rushed to convince her husband that he was deeply mistaken, and no one believed in him as much as she did. In the end, this conversation ended in nothing, only to start again the next day. Nevertheless, no matter how hard Alexander tried, Kate could not agree to his plan in any way. And he offered a very simple thing: to take out a large loan in her name in order to put this money into business. No bank wanted to lend money to him, who was bankrupt and officially unemployed, so he could not implement his idea without the help of his wife. Kate urged him to think about how exactly they would give this very loan in case of another failure. She was absolutely sure that this was not the way to restore her former status, but into an even deeper pit. And fortunately, she did not succumb to any persuasion from her husband, and then she got pregnant. Sergio had to give up all his business ideas and get a job in order to be able to feed his family, which was soon to become even bigger. Of course, he was not happy about this prospect, but both spouses were still confident that this situation was temporary. Kate did not plan to stay on maternity leave for a long time and was going to go to work as soon as she placed her son in a nursery. But even this plan was not destined to come true. There were no places in kindergartens historically. And pretty soon Kate realized that there was nothing to dream about a nursery. It's also good if the queue comes in 3 or 4 years. And then it turned out that she got pregnant again. Just when Leosha turned 3 years old, she already gave birth to 2 children. That's when Sergio began to quietly talk about how it would be nice for her to return to work. She knew it herself. But how is this possible with 3 small children in your arms? Over time, the husband became more insistent, but the situation did not change in any way, which eventually resulted in that ugly conflict that occurred that ill-fated evening. That's what Kate was thinking about, wandering aimlessly in the dark of night through the streets of an area that had become almost her home for so many years. Fortunately, although he was on the outskirts of the city, he was considered quite prosperous. Any crimes were extremely rare here, so it was quite safe to move, even at such a late hour. However, this was the last thing the woman thought about. Suddenly, a certain oddity caught her attention. Kate, immersed in her sad thoughts and memories, did not even immediately understand what exactly alerted her. It's just that somewhere in her subconscious, a neon sign seemed to flash, informing her that something was wrong in the space around her. Emerging from her own thoughts, the woman looked around and quickly discovered the reason for her vague concern. It was a little girl, the same age as her Alex. In her elegant pink dress, She sat on the curb in proud solitude and looked at the asphalt under her feet. Kate raised his eyebrows in surprise. In her neighborhood, she had never met street children, beggars, or just wandering the streets, especially at such a time. Still, decent enough people lived here to let the children go alone at night. And at the same time, they are far from rich, so that beggars would be interested in this area. In addition, the girl did not look like a street child, or even just a child from a dysfunctional family. She was wearing beautiful and clean, obviously new clothes, and she did not behave at all, as you would expect from little tramps. The whole situation surprised Kate extremely, but this surprise was unimportant, as if it were background. Her mind realized all these details much later, when she was once again replaying this strange meeting in her head. Right now, she was only interested in one thing: the child was outside at night, which meant he was in potential danger. It was necessary to give this girl all possible help. Guided by this very consideration, she carefully, so as not to scare, approached the baby and squatted down in front of her so that their faces were on the same level. Kate tried to speak quietly and affably. "Hello," she said. "What's your name?" "I do not know." The girl answered surprisingly calmly. "How is that?" Kate was surprised. "And that's it? I mean, I probably knew that once, but I forgot." "And who are your parents, and where are they?" "I don't know. I don't remember," the girl said. "Do you remember anything at all?" Kate asked cautiously. This time, the girl didn't say anything and just silently shook her head. The woman, however, was not satisfied with this answer. "But how did you get here?" "I came," the girl replied. "From where?" "From there." The child waved his hand indifferently, indicating the direction. "What was there?" "Is it a forest or a park of some kind?" "Don't know. I woke up there and didn't remember anything anymore. I just went somewhere. And now I'm tired and decided to sit down." Kate shook her head in disbelief. She didn't like the whole situation at all, and she wasn't even close to imagining exactly what she should do about it. Finally, after being silent and thinking for a while, she asked, "Are you hungry?" The girl nodded vigorously, making it clear that, apparently, she had not eaten for a very long time. "Okay," Kate sighed wearily. "Come with me. I'll feed you and put you to bed. And in our apartment, with my children. In the morning we will think about what to do with you. And for convenience, I'll call you Mary for now. Do you mind?" "No," the newly minted Mary replied very indifferently. Holding the girl tightly by the hand, Kate headed home. All her own troubles and sorrows immediately flew out of her mind. That was the way she was built. If someone needed help, her own problems were pushed into the background for her. Especially for her, as a mother, this situation with a street child, who also could not even remember his own name, was unbearable. When they reached the apartment without incident, it was already about 2 a.m. All Kate's household, as she immediately saw, were sleeping peacefully in their beds. The woman was even stung by some vague resentment. After all, none of them seemed to care where exactly she was at such a late hour. On the other hand, this state of affairs could not please her. Kate had no desire to explain to her children and her husband, especially her husband, where this girl came from and why she was in their apartment. She quietly went into the kitchen, took out the remains of a modest dinner from the refrigerator, and fed the little wife. After eating, the girl began to yawn desperately. It was clear that Mary had not only not eaten for a long time, but also had not slept for a long time. Kate decided to make a bed for her right there on the couch, and she settled down side by side on the floor and, terribly exhausted during the day, fell asleep very quickly, forgetting even to turn on her alarm clock. As a rule, she got up before anyone else in the house. After all, it was necessary to cook breakfast, get my husband to work, and my eldest son to school. Besides, she was the only one of the whole family who was a lark, and early ascents were not only familiar to her, but also pleasant. But of course, this did not apply to those cases when she had to stay up late. In such circumstances, it was extremely difficult to wake up without an alarm clock. Naturally, Kate overslept, and her awakening turned out to be not the most pleasant, because the woman woke up from the fact that someone was roughly shaking her by the shoulder. Opening her eyes, she saw Sergio's angry face right in front of her. "I'm late for work," he exclaimed, noticing that his wife had opened her eyes. "Breakfast is not ready. You're still sleeping, and not in bed but on the kitchen floor. And please explain to me, what kind of girl is snoring on our couch?" In the first few moments, Kate didn't even realize which girl he was talking to. Then she remembered her night adventures and tried to explain to Sergio what was what. He listened to her with a very skeptical expression on his face. Then he stated that when he returned home from work, Mary should no longer be in their house. After not having breakfast, he retired to work, leaving Kate to slowly come to her senses. However, even this luxury was beyond her reach. Just a few minutes later, the woman realized that her husband probably hadn't bothered to just wake Alex up, not to mention getting him ready for school, and for sure the child was sleeping peacefully in his crib. But if Sergio was already late for work, then it was high time for Alex to leave the house. For the first time this morning, Kate looked at her watch and clutched her head. My son's first lesson was supposed to start in 10 minutes. Waking Alex up, she hastily prepared a simple breakfast for him and sent him to class. Fortunately, it was not far to go to school, and the boy was quite able to cope with this road on his own. However, Kate understood that he would be late anyway, which means that he, and therefore she, would soon have problems related to this. However, Kate wasn't going to think about it right now, because she had other difficulties that required immediate action. Fortunately, all the commotion that had been going on in the house for the previous half hour did not disturb Mary's sound sleep. Her rescuer decided to wait for the girl to wake up on her own. In the meantime, take care of her own young children and think carefully about what exactly she should do. The girl got up only 2 hours later, and by this point Kate has already developed a clear plan of action. It was just the right time for a walk with the kids, and she decided taking Mary with her to look into the nearest police station. After all, that's why law enforcement agencies exist, to deal with such cases. "So you found this girl on the street last night?" the person on duty in the department asked her. "That's right." "And she can't even remember her name?" "That's right," Kate confirmed again. She did not understand the meaning of this procedure. Once the woman had already told the whole story, after which she outlined it again in a written statement. And now, reading her testimony, for some reason the police officer asks again about literally all the circumstances that she has already repeatedly disclosed. "Why didn't you go to the police right away?" "You see, I was very tired, and it just didn't occur to me that I should do exactly that." Mary didn't seem to understand at all that it was about her. Or she understood but didn't attach much importance to it. Instead, she looked with interest at the room they were in. Although, in Kate's opinion, there was nothing exciting or even just beautiful here, and there could not be. "And what are you planning to do with the child?" After a pause, the policeman asked. "What do you mean?" Kate was surprised. This question threw her into some shock before it was uttered. The woman sincerely believed that now the fate of the girl is the responsibility of law enforcement officers. Literally, the attendant replied indifferently, "We can put her in a special facility, or let him stay with you for now." Kate's eyes went dark. The choice she was being offered was impossible. On the one hand, her husband expressed himself quite clearly so that she would not be here by the evening, and she herself understood perfectly well that they simply could not afford another child. "I can barely cope with my own." It was all understandable and logical. But the other side of the coin was the word special institution orphanage, and to allow this girl to get there was unthinkable. Kate perfectly remembered, despite the years that had passed, how difficult it was for her to live and grow up in an orphanage, how she had to endure the bullying of other children and the cruel punishments of caregivers. For her, it was all in the past. She endured and overcame everything. But then she was born into a dysfunctional family who lost even those parents that she had early. She has been used to difficulties since childhood. For her, such treatment was normal. Mary is a completely different matter. It was immediately clear that this was a homely, beloved, perhaps even slightly spoiled child, besides with obvious mental trauma, Since she did not remember her past or even her real name, it was absolutely obvious that this girl simply would not survive in the harsh conditions of an orphanage. Of course, at that moment, the woman did not have time to scroll through all these long and tedious reflections in her head, but undoubtedly they were the motivation for her decision. Looking into the eyes of the attendant, she answered firmly, "The girl will stay with us." "That's fine," the policeman replied. He had clearly expected just such an answer, and upon receiving it, he suddenly opened up. "I'm from an orphanage myself, and I see that this girl clearly does not belong in such an institution." "That's what I thought," Kate replied rather coldly. "Generally speaking," he continued, not noticing her tone, "leaving her with you is not exactly according to the rules. But I will try to settle this issue." "Good," the woman replied. "Can we go now?" "Yes, of course. If anything becomes known about the baby's relatives, we will call you. But to tell you the truth, I would advise you to start searching on your own. You know, sometimes the internet can do more than the police." When Kate finally returned home, she found a frustrated Lyosha there. He had already returned from school and dejectedly showed his mother a diary in which there was an entry about his tardiness and that the homeroom teacher was calling her. "I'm sorry, Mom," the son said guiltily. "I had to get up myself in the morning." "No, I shouldn't have," Kate replied. "You know it's my job to wake everyone up in the morning. Not because it's supposed to be that way or anything like that, but because that's what we agreed on. So I owe you an apology." From their conversation, it might seem that no outsider girl was present in the apartment. Alex, although he squinted at her with some perplexity, tactfully did not ask any questions. Kate once again thought about how lucky she was to have a son who, in early childhood, unlike many, even from the same twins, was an absolutely trouble-free child. Leaving the younger children in the care of the older ones, Kate set about preparing lunch. Then everyone sat down at the table. To the woman's surprise, Alex and Mary managed to become friends somehow and chatted animatedly about something of their own. And only after eating, when the girl was not around, the son approached her with an obvious question. "Mom, is Mary going to live with us now?" I asked her, but she doesn't know. So far. "Yes, son," Kate replied. "The girl is lost, and she needs help. If we don't take her in, she'll go to an orphanage. It's good that she stays," Alex suddenly concluded. "Why?" My mother was surprised. "The younger ones like her," her son informed her seriously. "So now you and I are going to have something. Patting his hair, Kate laughed loudly and went about her usual household chores, washing, cleaning, cooking dinner for her husband's arrival. The woman preferred not to think about what would happen when he did return from work. However, the scandal that happened exceeded all her expectations. The husband shouted that they would not feed, as he put it, a street urchin, because the cost of children was already prohibitively high. "What do you know about expenses related to children?" Unexpectedly, even for herself, Kate flared up. "Have you ever bought them anything? Do you have any idea at least approximately what needs a child has?" She herself did not know what prompted her to start this accusatory speech. Perhaps it was just that resentment had accumulated in my soul over the years, which now needed to be poured out somewhere. Her husband listened to her angry confession in an unusually quiet voice, not trying to interrupt or object. He must not have expected such pressure from his wife, usually affectionate, calm, even in conflict situations. And Kate talked and talked, expressing all that had accumulated in her soul, and about the fact that the money that he earns is not enough for a living, and about the fact that this could have been avoided if he had got a job right away, instead of sitting on her neck for several years. She even recalled to him the various excesses that he allowed himself after the birth of their children, while she herself had to count the pennies that he gave her in order to somehow feed and clothe the whole family. Of course, she talked not only about money, but also about how their relationship had deteriorated, how she missed her former love and romance. Not only in not so many flowers and gifts, of course not. She would like simple human attention and at least a little warmth and participation instead of constant unfair reproaches. Well, Sergio said in a completely calm tone when Kate finally finished her monologue, "I understand that you will all be much better off without me than with me." This ominous phrase hung in the air. And the men, without saying another word, took out a large suitcase from the closet in the room and began to pack their things into it. Kate, it would seem, should have seen this, started crying, apologizing, telling her husband how much she loves him, persuading him not to make hasty decisions. And just 2 days ago she would have done so, but now she looked at what was happening with a composure that killed her. Sergio was going deliberately slowly and periodically glanced at Kate. Obviously, he expected the usual reaction from her and, most likely, wanted to scare the woman more than he really wanted to leave. If so, then his plan didn't work. And when the suitcase was fully packed, there was nowhere to retreat. Well, to hell with you, he angrily told his wife and slammed the front door behind him. Kate stood in the middle of the kitchen for a few more minutes, then waved her hand and went to the nursery. There, Mary and Alex tried their best to calm the younger children, who were obviously scared by the ugly scene in the kitchen. The elders themselves were pale as chalk, but feeling their responsibility, they tried not to panic. The woman hugged all 4 of them tightly. "Is Dad not coming back anymore?" Alex finally asked. Kate noted that there was not a drop of regret or, on the contrary, joy in his voice. He didn't really care if Dad came back or not. He was just clarifying the information. Of course, this man, who rarely appeared at home, even on weekends, was almost a stranger to the children. "I do not know," she answered honestly. "Maybe he'll come back after a while." So the 5 of them began to live together, 4 children and Kate herself. And if at first she was afraid that without her husband's help she simply would not pull out such a horde of hungry mouths, then she soon discovered that this was not the case at all. On the contrary, life has become much easier and calmer without constant scandals and ridiculous demands. This is despite the fact that there was not much money for household expenses. Sergio allocated a very tiny amount from his salary, while Kate paid for the bulk of them from her benefits. However, the deadline was approaching when the first ones were supposed to end, and this was a bit of a problem. Kate understood that there was no way she could go full-time with 4 small children. But suddenly, with Sergio's departure, she had the strength and time to slowly start looking for options, at least part-time. And then several lucky cases helped her at once. First, the headmistress from the kindergarten called her, the queue for admission in which her children were waiting, without saying anything specific on the phone. She earnestly asked Kate to come to the institution as soon as possible for a personal conversation. "Hello," she began at the meeting. "As I understand it, you have been waiting for a very long time for your children to be able to enter our kindergarten. So long that one of them has already managed to go to school." Kate replied somewhat irritably. "I'll tell you a secret," the headmistress remarked. "By the time your turn comes, the younger ones will have time too. Many remain without a garden. Unfortunately, we have many more children than places. And don't look at me like that. I didn't make it up, and I can't change it." "And what is it? Did you call me just to tell me that we have no chance?" "On the contrary, I called you to propose a solution to this problem. You see, we had another babysitter in the nursery quit some time ago. No one stays long, you know, and I can't find a new one. The remaining staff is getting knocked off their feet and is about to run away too. So I thought it would be worth offering this job to someone who has been waiting in line for a long time. To be honest, there is a lot of work, but the salary is small. But we will be able to immediately accept your children into the age-appropriate group." "And why are you offering this to me?" Kate asked suspiciously. "I don't even have a pedagogical education. Surely there are more suitable candidates." "But you have 3 children of your own. Believe me, this is much more important in the work that you have to do. However, I will not hide the fact that we also made such an offer to the more suitable candidates, as you put it. However, none of them agreed to it. Then we made a list of those who might be interested in such a deal. And you're not the first one I've called. Will that answer suit you?" Kate was satisfied with this answer. Now she had some kind of job that could be perfectly combined with taking care of younger children. The older ones were already independent enough to spend several hours in the apartment without her and heat their own lunch on their own. Moreover, the kindergarten was very close to both their school and home. Of course, they did not live very well, but not worse than before Sergio left. Life was starting to get better, and after a while, a second successful event occurred. This time, Kate was called by the same police officer on duty who a few weeks ago took her statement about what she found on Mary Street. "Is there any news about her parents?" Kate asked hopefully. "None, alas," the policeman replied. "As I told you, we are not very good at such things. Moreover, the data set about it is minimal. Have you tried looking for it yourself?" "Yes, somehow it was not up to that." The woman shrugged her shoulders. "You know, I have 3 of my own besides her. And recently my husband also left. So that." "I see," the policeman sighed. "But in general, I called you on a very specific matter. You see, I finally managed to formalize Mary's stay with you. It means that now you can get her into school and all that." "Great," Kate beamed. The fact that Mary couldn't go to school really strained the woman a lot. So far, she had been studying with her on her own, but she understood that this issue would need to be resolved no later than the next school year begins. But summer was already rapidly approaching, and this meant that very soon the problem would become very acute. "Yes. In addition, you become the official guardian of the girl. This, of course, involves some payments. In addition, as I understand it, you will be able to claim certain benefits and benefits as a mother of many children." Everything turned out exactly as he said. Of course, there was always not enough money for something, but now, at least Kate could be sure that the children would be dressed, shod, fed, and placed in educational institutions. Contrary to her fears, life without Sergio did not collapse not only financially, but also emotionally. No matter how hard she tried, she could not feel any feelings about his departure. Something must have burned out in her at the very moment when her husband recklessly accused her of non-existent infidelity. This reaction surprised Kate very much. But for all that, I couldn't help but make her happy. With 4 children in her arms, the suffering of a collapsed love would be completely inappropriate. On the other hand, perhaps the children contributed to her peace of mind. With all her worries, she simply had no time to indulge in sadness and despair. So 2 more years passed. For the convenience of all family members, it was decided to conditionally divide the apartment into 2 halves, male and female. Mary and the younger Anne moved into Kate's room, where the adults used to live. Alyosha, with his brother Ted, stayed in his room. It was, of course, a little cramped, but so far it has not created any special problems. Mary and Alex's friendship grew stronger every day. They went to the same school now. However, the girl was a grade younger. The boy treated her like another little sister and took care of her in every possible way. She also has a great relationship with her younger children. In short, despite her unexpected appearance, she fit in perfectly with the family. Kate herself fell in love with the girl as her own daughter, and sometimes even forgot that this was not true. Mary, in turn, quickly got used to calling a woman mom, and her children brothers and sisters. The day on which the girl was discovered was unanimously decided to consider her birthday. It seemed quite symbolic. After all, who knows what might have happened to Mary if she hadn't caught her eye in time. In a sense, it could be said that it was the terrible scene staged by Sergio that evening that saved the baby from a much sadder fate. And although Kate was glad that Mary was now her daughter, she couldn't figure out if no one was looking for the girl. On the advice of a policeman, she repeatedly advertised for a found child, and all to no avail. The guards did not succeed in finding her parents either. Adding to the worry was the fact that the girl never got her real memories back. It seemed that until the moment she woke up in the park, she simply did not exist in this world, which of course could not possibly be true. And Kate would really like to know how things really were. But the most diverse doctors in the budget polyclinic only spread their hands. They had never encountered such severe cases and had no idea what to do in such a situation. The only thing one of them could do was to give contacts to a good private clinic specializing in helping children who have lost their memory. But the family, of course, did not have the money for this. Mary herself. The lack of memories of the past didn't seem to bother him at all. She naively lived for today like a child and knew only that this day was good for her, and what was there before all this is not so important. Kate couldn't understand this either, and even envied her adopted daughter in some good way. At her age, she really wanted to find out who her parents were and for what reason they are no longer with her. And in the end, she brought the teacher with her questions so much that she took it and answered her honestly and directly. They were drunks, unnecessary and useless, like yourself. Then they died, and you fell on our head. Did you find out what you wanted? Are you happy? Now go clean the toilets. It's your turn today. Remembering this episode, Kate sometimes thought that maybe it was a good thing that Mary had no interest in her past. On the other hand, when the woman found her, she did not look at all like a child who was very unlucky in this life. Rather the opposite. And it often occurred to her that it might be much more comfortable and pleasant for a girl to live with her own family than with them. However, one way or another, Kate could not change anything in this situation, although she made every effort to do so. And, in the end, she resigned herself to the idea that they would never know the whole truth. And perhaps, it was at this moment that she finally decided that the girl was now not just temporarily living with her, but was a full-fledged member of her family. And then the question arose of no longer just being her guardian, but fully adopting a child. And here she encountered a ridiculous and at the same time sad legal subtlety. While still in an official marriage, she could not do this without her husband's consent. It meant only one thing: it was necessary to get a divorce. With a heavy heart, Kate dialed Sergio's number. She absolutely did not want to talk to this man, and she would have been much more willing to do it through the court. But such a process would have taken much longer, and the woman hoped that her husband, with whom she had not had any contact for 2 years, would simply agree to peacefully file an application and go their separate ways, not only in fact, but also officially. Kate, Sergio's gentle voice came on the line. I'm so glad you finally called me. You have no idea how much I've missed you. Kate was taken aback. On the one hand, something hurt and at the same time sweetly pecked at her heart. It was the tone he had used with her before all the horror that had happened to them. It's like she's back in those happy days. On the other hand, it sounded extremely inappropriate right now. I know that you miss me too, and in the end you will make the right decision. Sergio continued enthusiastically. You can't just leave your own husband because of some street girl. Aren't you calling to say that this problem is settled and I can come back? The whole patina of happy memories was gone. With the last phrase, her husband vividly reminded Kate of the reason why, when he left, she was not even very upset about it, and responded to it in the coldest possible tone. Sergio, I'm calling to ask you for a divorce. So you found yourself a new man? His voice immediately lost all viscosity. Quickly, you won't say anything. I didn't find anyone. Anyway, it's none of your business. Exactly, since you left me alone with 4 children in my arms, as you said at the time, we have been able to live perfectly well without you. And now I would like to settle this last formality. I didn't leave you, her husband said indignantly. I just couldn't stay in the same apartment with this girl, and I wasn't able to carry another child, and I got out of your life until you solved this problem. Believe me, I have solved all my problems perfectly, except for one, about which I am calling you. Let's end this useless conversation. Sergio, neither I nor my children need you anymore. There was real fury in his voice now. In that case, file a lawsuit. I won't give you a divorce. I just advise you to think carefully before doing this. And for example, to remember that the apartment you and I acquired in marriage. This is a jointly acquired property. And now I have to live with my parents, who are not too eager to see me here. You know what I'm getting at. With that, he hung up the phone. Kate couldn't believe what she had heard. Would he really not give her a divorce? Moreover, is she threatening to deprive them of their only corner with the children if she decides to do so? Is this really the romantic and loving young man she once married? But she had nowhere to retreat. After several more attempts to peacefully negotiate with her husband, she realized that everything was useless. Either she gets rid of Mary and Sergio returns home, or a divorce through the court with the division of the apartment. He didn't want to hear about any other options. I understand that you still need time to come to your senses, he said in one such conversation, and I'm not in a hurry to make a decision. But since you deigned to talk to me, keep in mind I'm waiting for your decision. And even my patience is not unlimited. Kate herself did not want to delay all this, maintaining a kind of status quo. It was clear that this issue could not be suspended indefinitely. We need to solve it right now. After all, Mary's official adoption is also a kind of formality, just like this divorce. It's true. But what if, for example, she wants to remarry? In the end, Kate finally decided and filed a lawsuit. Before that, she did one single thing. She tried to explain to the children in terms that they could understand that their living conditions could soon become even worse than they were before. And at least for some time, they will all have to live in a one-room apartment. To her surprise and delight, everyone was sympathetic to such a decision. Sergio kept his word and really tried to sue the part of the apartment due to him. However, unexpectedly for everyone, the court refused him this requirement. The judge referred to the fact that all their children live in this apartment with their mother. Besides, there is also the only place of residence of another child, so it is impossible to share the apartment in any way, except in the event that an unlucky father takes some of the children to his upbringing. There was an ominous silence in the hall. The guys were still too young to have their opinions and wishes taken into account by the court. Therefore, at this moment, everything depended on Sergio's response. For several minutes, he looked triumphantly at his ex-wife. She understood that he did not need children, but in order to shake his nerves, he might agree to this proposal. And then they will have many more months of new lawsuits, the fight for the children, which he of course will lose. But all this will take Kate's time and money, not to mention millions of nerve cells. However, the husband apparently decided that he did not need these problems either. And he agreed that the children should stay with their mother, but in this case he should be compensated in the amount of the market value of his half of the apartment. The court agreed with this. Nevertheless, given the small incomes of Kate and Ted and her dependents, she had to pay this money in small amounts over the years. Not that such a decision would satisfy any of the parties. Nevertheless, it turned out to be the only possible compromise. In the Kate family, this state of affairs was considered an absolute victory. The children, no matter how she prepared them, turned out to be scared of the lawsuit, and especially the prospect that they would be separated and forced to live with their father, whom the younger ones did not even remember. And now that it was all over, the guys were jubilant. In addition, being an absolutely free woman and Mary's longtime guardian, Kate, although not without difficulty, was able to achieve the official adoption of the girl. This was the reason for a big celebration, by their standards. His indispensable attributes were to be an inexpensive but delicious cake from the store, as well as a trip to the amusement park. None of the children had ever been to such a place in their lives, but of course each of them dreamed of going there at least once. For 3 months, the woman squeezed all the expenses she could, just to save money for this trip and arrange real entertainment for her children. And so, a significant day has come. The guys looked around with interest, trying to choose which of the various entertainments they would like to experience. Of course, there was no question of trying everything at once, and fortunately, even the little ones understood these limitations perfectly. Only Mary, usually noisy and cheerful, behaved in an unusually quiet way. She was looking around with a strange expression on her face, as if she was wondering why she was in this place. But it was a completely different kind of surprise than everyone else's. Mary paid very little attention to the rides themselves. She seemed to know them well. "Mary, are you all right?" Kate asked her, concerned about the girl's atypical behavior. "Yes, everything is fine," she replied in a low and colorless voice. This amazed the woman even more. The child's intonation was radically at odds with the meaning of her words, which was completely unusual for Mary. Open and trusting, she is not used to hiding her emotions. That's why her attempt to do this turned out to be an absolute failure and alarmed her foster mother even more. However, Kate did not continue this dialogue. She knew perfectly well that if Mary had any reason to try to hide her feelings, then no matter how much she questioned, she would only achieve that the girl would withdraw even more into herself. Otherwise, there is a good chance that she herself will want to share her experiences. And so it happened. Kate's own children, completely mesmerized by the surrounding environment, did not notice anything around them and enthusiastically argued about which attraction should be tried first. Finally, they came to a common decision and went to the Ferris wheel. Mary unexpectedly refused to go with them, citing a fear of heights. No one tried to dissuade her. He and Kate sat down on a bench, from which it was clearly visible that wheel booth, in which the others sat down all along its route. There was an awkward silence for a while. Then the girl interrupted him with a phrase that her foster parent expected to hear the least. "Mom, don't be mad at me," she began and stopped in mid-sentence, trying to see Kate's reaction in her eyes. "Have I ever been angry with you?" she replied in surprise. "No," Mary said, embarrassed. "Well, you can now." "Why? Honey, what happened?" "You see, since we came to this park, I have a feeling that I know it, as if I had been here before. Maybe it was true." Kate felt a joyful anticipation. Are the memories starting to come back to the girl? Could it be that her real parents really took her to this particular park, or just to a similar one, and now the environment helps her restore her memory? Why should I be angry about that? What's wrong with that? After all, we will find out exactly what happened to you. Maybe we can even find these people and let them know that you're okay. But then they'll probably want to take me away," Mary exclaimed, almost in horror. "It's not going to be that easy," Kate tried to reassure her. "You're going to be 9 years old soon, maybe more. Unfortunately, we don't even know that for sure. You've seen for yourself recently that a trial is not a quick matter. And there is no way to do without him here. Well, as soon as you turn 10, you can decide for yourself which family you want to live in. And besides, maybe you'll like your own parents more than me." "Well, no," Mary pouted. "How can you know that?" "They abandoned me," the girl responded with childishness. "Maybe they didn't abandon it, but just lost it and still can't find it. Anyway, I've already got used to you, and to my brothers, and to my sister. I've been trying very hard not to remember anything for a long time." So that, Mary couldn't find the right words further. Well, Kate already understood her perfectly in order not to face this impossible choice. After all, she probably loved her real parents too. And if she remembers them, the feelings may return. But the new family has already become almost native to her. "Listen," Kate said as gently as she could. "It seems to you now that there are only 2 options, but in fact there are many more. If it so happens that we find your real parents, you don't have to say goodbye to us forever. You will be able to visit us, play with your brothers and sister, and do it quite often. I'm sure. Whoever these people are, they love you. And realizing that it's better for you, they won't stop it." Mary rolled her eyes. It didn't seem to have occurred to her at all. But now her thoughts were flowing in that direction. And the girl calmed down a little, realizing that everything was not as hopeless as she had imagined. Unfortunately, Kate couldn't say the same about herself. She was not at all sure of the validity of her own soothing words. It is not known how long this conversation would have continued and what it would have led to in the end if it had not been interrupted in a rather unceremonious way. A man dressed in the uniform of an amusement park employee approached them. He had a broom in his hand, and he didn't look the most welcoming. Nevertheless, when he spoke, his words sounded polite and without any aggression. "Hello, I'm sorry, but the fact is that your daughter seemed very familiar to me. Is this Veronica by any chance?" Hearing this name, the girl started up. From the outside, she looked like a lost dog who heard her nickname in a casual conversation with strangers. She began to stare intently at the janitor, as if to remember if she had ever met him before. "You see, what's the matter?" Kate answered, carefully choosing her words. "We don't know for sure, and we can't rule out that this is her. The fact is that this girl was found about 3 years ago, quite far from this place. She wandered down the street at a very young age, did not remember anything at all about her past, and, unfortunately, does not remember to this day. If you really know her." 3 years ago. The janitor exclaimed, stunned. "I'm sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you, but that was the last time I saw the girl I'm talking about. Of course, she looked much younger then, but the resemblance is striking." "Tell me everything from the beginning," Kate suggested. While the janitor was sighing and gathering his thoughts, the children returned, which seemed to be on the Ferris wheel. However, Alex realized from just one look from his mother that something serious was going on, and it was clearly not worth interfering with the conversation. He diverted the attention of the younger ones to some kind of carousel, and then carefully led them to a new attraction. "You see, they used to come here a lot, the Smith family. But I later found out that their names were father, mother, and a little girl," the janitor finally began. "They came here almost every week and then disappeared. but I didn't think much of it at the time. You never know, maybe they found another park that they liked better, or something else. Then all sorts of entertaining things just started to grow all over the city, like mushrooms after the rain. And then what? Mary asked, listening to him as if spellbound. And then I saw an ad in the newspaper that this girl was missing. Her parents offered a lot of money for any information about her whereabouts, but as I understand it, they never found it. And you don't have, I don't know, a copy of this newspaper left? Kate asked with a mixture of fear and hope. There's no newspaper left, the janitor replied. But if you are interested in the contacts of these people, then I have saved them just in case I see or hear something. After digging a little in his pocket, he took out an old push-button phone, found the right number and dictated it to Kate. It would be nice if you turned out to be Veronica, he said to Masha finally. As far as I could see, your parents love you very much. Everyone returned home in a strange, agitated state. It is possible that the solution to the mystery was right in their hands, but none of them knew what her disclosure would lead to. The astute Alex, of course, noticed that something was wrong, but did not ask unnecessary questions. On the contrary, he diligently distracted the attention of Tanya and Ted so that they would not bother him once again. Kate spent several days in a row with the phone in her hands, then dialing the cherished number, then quickly resetting it until the call had time to go through. It wasn't even that she was afraid of what she might find out. She just had no idea how to start this difficult conversation. But at some point, gathering her strength, she still took this decisive step into the unknown. Hello, what can I do for you? After a few rings, a pleasant male voice answered her. Hello, Kate said, then exhaled sharply and continued. My name is Katrina. I'm calling about your daughter, who disappeared about 3 years ago. What? The polite, neutral, friendly tone of the interlocutor immediately changed. The man was obviously startled by what he had heard and had absolutely no idea how to react to it. Whether to be happy, indignant, or scared, what information could this unknown woman have given him? You see, what's the matter? There is some possibility that she was under my care all this time, and she was recently adopted by me. I can't say for sure, because the girl had lost her memory for some reason and had no idea about her relatives. I don't want to get your hopes up for nothing, but a few days ago, it was as if the janitor from the amusement park recognized her. I think you and I need to meet and discuss everything, the man replied hoarsely. You're right, but I would prefer that the first meeting took place without the participation of the girl. Why bother her and you unnecessarily? I agree, he replied. It had only been a few hours when Kate, terribly worried, went into one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. A man was already waiting for her at the indicated table. Perhaps he was 10 years older than herself, which did not affect his beauty in any way. Even in such an environment, the woman could not help but notice that he looked just great. Hello again, she said, sitting down opposite him. He nodded silently. Either he didn't want to say anything, or he just couldn't. Without saying a word, he took out a folder from his business briefcase and, putting it on the table, carefully pushed it towards his interlocutor. She, in turn, handed him some simple film photographs of Mary. Opening the folder, Kate found that the stranger had the same idea as she had. He brought several pictures of his daughter, taken, apparently shortly before her disappearance, in that very amusement park. In one of the photos, she posed in a pink dress that she was wearing the night the woman found her on the street. There could be no doubt it was Mary who was depicted in the images. Kate didn't have any photos of the girl dating back to the same period, only the most recent pictures taken with a recently purchased cheap camera, bought by hand on one of the classified sites. Despite this, the man obviously unmistakably recognized his daughter. It's Veronica. My God, she's alive. And, as far as I know, she is absolutely healthy, except for memory loss. I'm afraid, however, that I had no way to ensure the standard of living to which she was accustomed. But the alternative was an orphanage. And I found that even my modest one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts is better than this. The man relapsed into silence. Kate didn't rush him. She understood roughly what kind of storm was going on in this man's soul. Finally, she settled down a little bit, and he was able to somehow put words into sentences. The first thing he said sounded very unexpected. "I still haven't introduced myself. I'm George." "It's a pleasure," Kate replied magically. He stammered. "I'm sorry. I'm in a bit of shock right now. But anyway, I have to thank you for taking my girl in. I've been trying to find her parents for quite a long time, but apparently they somehow broke up with you." She began cautiously. "As I understand it, you mostly advertised in newspapers, and I posted them on the internet." "But I didn't even think about the internet," George sighed, "and no one suggested it. Although I've always been told that I'm too old-fashioned, especially for my age." "Have you reported it to the police?" "I did, of course," he sighed, "but they couldn't find anything." "It's strange, because the first thing I did was go to the police. However, her employee told me back then that they were unlikely to be able to do anything. I didn't know her name, though, and it probably needs them to check through their channels. By the way, about this. You said she lost her memory." "Unfortunately, yes, I took her to the doctors, but they couldn't do anything either. However, when we were in that very park, she seemed to begin to vaguely recognize this place. Maybe if she sees you, she'll have other memories too." "I would like to believe it," George replied with another heavy sigh. "But you see, there is another problem." "What do you mean?" "You see, the girl lived in our family like a native. She became very attached to me, and perhaps even more importantly, to my children. And I, sorry for the abruptness, will insist that they continue to communicate. Unless, of course, you intend to take her in." "You're not rich at all, are you?" George suddenly clarified. "I'm not going to be ashamed of this, and I can assure you that Veronica gets everything she needs for life." "That's not what I'm getting at," he said. "It's just that I think I have a proposal for you that will suit all parties. Unless, of course, you hold on to your job too much." "What exactly are you suggesting?" "You see, I am a single, very busy man, and I am not at all sure that I will be able to devote proper TED time to my child. You see, after all that happened, I threw myself into my work. I have a big mansion in the suburbs. Move in with me with the children. You will be a babysitter with accommodation. Don't worry about school. You will be able to send children there with a personal driver. By the way, we have an elite institution very close by. I think we can put not only Veronica there, but also her new brothers or sisters. You said you have several children of your own." 3, Kate confirmed, "and 2 of them are supposed to go to school this year." "So you agree?" "It's a very tempting offer," Kate replied thoughtfully. "There's just one thing I don't understand. That janitor in the park said that the 3 of you always came there. Where is your wife?" George lowered his eyes to the table, but Kate managed to notice how tears flashed treacherously in them. It was only now that she realized how stupid and tactless her question had been. They've lost a child. Perhaps they thought that the girl was no longer alive. You never know what could have happened to the mother under such circumstances. "You see," said George, having quickly mastered his emotions, "Veronica was a late child, very long awaited and beloved. My wife and I wanted a big family, but for a long time nothing worked out, and finally our daughter appeared. The doctors said that Natasha's body simply could not stand the second birth. And then our only daughter disappeared, and now I've found it. My poor wife has not lived to see this moment for only a few months. She got sick right after Veronica went missing, and now she's gone." "I'm sorry," Kate said softly. "I'm sorry for your loss." He nodded and took a sip of water from the glass in front of him. They sat in awkward silence for several painful minutes, and then, wanting to turn the topic of conversation to something less painful, they began to discuss the details of Mary Veronica's move and meeting with her own father. As a result, Kate returned home with a clear plan of action. Her own children perceived moving to a huge mansion as a magical adventure. Even Alex, always restrained and serious beyond his years, almost jumped for joy. Mary alone showed no signs of happiness. She still did not remember her father and decided to meet with him. In addition, she was visibly upset by the news of her mother's death. "I don't remember her now," she told Kate. "I'm not even sad. But if I remember, I'll probably be very upset. That's why I chose to tell you about it now, so that you'll be ready when you remember," the woman replied. It took another 2 weeks before the family was fully ready to move. And finally, the day came when Mary Veronica was supposed to meet her own dad. All participants and witnesses of this event, except perhaps small children, were terribly worried. Even Lyosha was noticeably worried about his sister. George organized the transportation of things. He sent his personal driver for the family. All the way the girl sat on pins and needles, spinning, bouncing, and couldn't concentrate on anything. However, when they left the city, she suddenly froze, looking out the window, as if she recognized the scenery flying by outside. As soon as the car pulled up to the mansion, she screamed loudly. George was no less worried than his daughter and was waiting for them right on the doorstep. The girl came out of the Maguna and froze, looking either at him or at the house. Her father leaned forward, but hesitated and eventually remained in place, only starting to nervously move from foot to foot. She came up to him herself and said in a semi-interrogative tone, "Dad? Veronica, my daughter. Do you remember me?" It was obvious that he was restraining his desire to hug the child so as not to scare her. After all, he was well aware that he was probably nothing more than some unknown uncle to her right now, even if she was informed that he was her father. But most likely, she does not remember and does not feel it. "It's like I'm remembering something, but not. Maybe I made it up at all." Unable to withstand the intensity of emotions, she burst into tears. The guys immediately ran up to her to hug her tightly. "Nothing," her foster mother said. "It's okay, daughter. Give yourself time. You'll remember everything. Let's not rush things." The last phrase was addressed rather to George. However, he did not think to take any action, realizing what a difficult situation they were all in. Turning abruptly, he entered the house, motioning for the new residents to follow him. The family had already lived in the mansion for a month, and the girl's memory did not even think about recovering. Periodically, she seemed to recall some fragments, but she herself could not understand whether it was true or a figment of her imagination. Finally, after consulting, George and Kate decided that it was time for them to seek professional help. By some miracle, the woman found a business card of a private clinic that was once left to her by one of the doctors of the city hospital. George could afford to pay for the services of her specialists, and the girl began to visit this institution regularly. "Do not expect an immediate result from us," one of the doctors warned them. "It may take many months or even years to restore memory, especially if it was lost as a result of a dramatic memory. Do you think she suffered some kind of injury?" George asked worriedly. "I mean a psychological injury," the doctor explained. "Our examination did not reveal any physical damage, but the very fact that she was lost could be what blocked her memory, especially if she has already decided that she will never return home. If you want, a kind of defense mechanism has worked, and now we have to convince her brain that it no longer needs it. That evening, after putting the children to bed, Kate knocked on George's room. He was sitting at his desk and writing something in a thick notebook. "Do you need something?" "What is it?" he asked politely. "George, I wanted to ask you, but I still couldn't decide. Tell me, how did Veronica disappear?" "Call her by her usual name, if you like. She doesn't respond to Veronica anyway, and it's not a fact that it will ever be. And as for the circumstances of her disappearance, in fact, I know practically nothing. That evening, my wife and I put her to bed, and in the morning she was gone. We searched the house and the surrounding area, but found nothing. We didn't have surveillance cameras or on the road at that time, but we didn't find any traces of strangers in the house. It was as if she had left on her own accord. But as far as I understand, she had no reason to do that?" "Not as far as I know," George replied. 6 months of treatment in the clinic have passed, and it finally gave the first results, and the most joyful for the girl's father. She finally remembered him. It turned out early in the morning, when a satisfied Mary Veronica ran down the stairs to the living room, where George was having breakfast, and took him in her arms. This, of course, did not in any way negate her love and affection for her new family. It was only now that she was really glad that they all lived in the same spacious house. Since then, she has responded to both of her names. And when it came time for her to get a passport, she insisted that both of them were registered there. From that day on, her memory began to gradually return to her. The girl recalled some episodes from her childhood, her mother, and the neighborhood children with whom she loved to play. By the age of 14, she already remembered literally everything, except one thing: what exactly happened on the day she disappeared, and how did she manage to end up on the other side of the city. It was only 2 more years later that these memories began to return to her. Not immediately, very smoothly. At first, in the form of some vague images that came mostly in a dream, but gradually they became clearer and clearer, until finally they formed into one complete picture. And that's when she finally managed to tell her parents everything. The solution turned out to be ridiculously simple and banal. "I went to get the kitten," she said. "What kind of kitten?" Kate was surprised. "So white, so beautiful. He was walking in our yard, and I couldn't sleep, and I was looking at him from the window. And then he left the yard, and I wondered where exactly. I climbed out of the window. My room was on the ground floor then, and I went to get him. I thought it wasn't far, just one peek. I came out of the yard, and he was gone. I went one way, the other. I tried to find him, but he was nowhere to be found. Apparently, he ran away somewhere on his cat business. Or maybe he was at home at all, just walking, and went to his house. Actually, I was going to too, when I realized that I wouldn't find the cat anyway." "So you just got lost?" George was surprised. "Well, yes, it turns out that way. And apparently, trying to return, she began to walk further and further away from home. I reached the city in the morning. I was cold, of course, tired and hungry. I decided I could take the bus. I've seen them walking around here. And she went, of course, in the wrong direction. And the bus, to tell the truth, was most likely the wrong one. So I wandered around the city for several days, and I got to the other end of it. As I understand it, it never occurred to anyone to look for me there. I haven't slept all this time, I was afraid. But at some point my body couldn't stand it, and I fell asleep right on a park bench. And when I woke up, I didn't remember anything. She went wherever she wanted. And then my mom met me. That's actually the whole story." Around the same time, when the girls' memories returned, George and Kate decided to get married. Living in the same house, they became very close and found quite a lot of common interests, and her own children had long perceived her new husband as their father. He responded in kind. Kate fulfilled her childhood dream. She entered the institute again at the Faculty of Economics and graduated with a red diploma. After that, her husband was happy to hire her at his company. The woman sold her second apartment, having fully paid Sergio for his half of this living space. So they lived as a big friendly family in a huge mansion, which now became their common home. In memory of her adventures, the girl dragged a huge white cat from somewhere. The street animal required a long course of treatment. The parents grumbled for a long time about this reckless act of their daughter, but they left the cat. Alice got off at the last stop from the 6th bus, which had already become almost her own. The girl had traveled this route so often that she already knew every driver who worked on it. As usual, Alice was looking around. She liked this place. It would seem that there is still a city line, but it looks like you are somewhere in the village. Across the road, there are fields and meadows. On the horizon, the forest darkens in a narrow strip. It was especially beautiful here now, in the middle of summer, with bright flowers in the meadow. The scent of heated grass is in the air, and the sky is clear, and pale blue. A light breeze drives lush white clouds across it. This landscape invariably lifts Alice's spirits. And now the girl couldn't help but smile. After seeing nature, Alice turned around and went in a completely different direction. She has her own business here. The girl walked confidently along the path, trampled in the grass. She walks through it every week. First there, then back. Any Sunday, the girl is here. Of course, he misses it occasionally. For example, when he is ill, or if the weather is very unsuitable. A snowstorm, heavy downpour, frost, but this happens very infrequently. Alice still tries not to miss her visits, otherwise the girl feels somehow uncomfortable afterwards. Here it is, the old city cemetery. It's familiar. Trees grow quietly right among the graves. Now in summer, their lush crowns provide a pleasant shade, Alice already knows her way around here very well. At first, of course, the girl went here with her dad. Still, when the trouble happened, she was just a baby. She had just turned 9 years old. Alice is now 13. She is almost as tall as her father, one of the tallest in the class, and generally looks more like a girl than a child in the mirror. I wonder if her mother would have recognized her if by some miracle they had met now. But this will never happen. Because when Alice was in the 3rd grade, her mother was hit by a drunk driver right at the crosswalk. Then Alice heard people talking about this tragedy. The car flew around the corner, took off as if from nowhere. The woman crossing the road at that moment in the prescribed place did not have a single chance, so the car tore it down and sped past. All this at high speed. The driver didn't even slow down. As it turned out later, he did not even notice what he had done. He got so drunk. He walked in a nightclub from evening to morning and then decided that he was sober enough to get home in his own car. In the early morning, this man ran over a woman who was in a hurry to work. Alice had to walk across the street that morning by her mother's hand because the girl studied at the same school where her parent taught. Every morning they went to their place of study and worked together, but Alice stayed at home that ill-fated morning. She had a fever the day before, so she was not allowed to go to school. Who knows what would have happened to Alice if it hadn't been for the disease? Witnesses of the tragedy called for help. The injured woman was taken to the intensive care unit. Alice's father got a call right away. He had just reached the factory where he worked as an electrician. The man immediately rushed to the hospital. In general, he immediately had a lot of things to do. Conversations with the police, searching for the right medicines, buying things his wife needed in the hospital. But Alice did not know about what had happened until the evening, until her father came home. She didn't even feel anything. She was comfortable at home alone. Classmates were sitting at desks and boring paragraphs, solving difficult examples. Alice, buried in a blanket, was reading her favorite book about the adventures of the girl, Ellie, in a magical land. I also drank tea with cookies. It's beautiful. In the evening, much later than usual, Dad came home. Mom was still not there, but Alice was not worried about this. Probably the school was delayed again, a parent-teacher meeting or some kind of disco where the teacher is on duty. This is not uncommon. From the sad face of the parent, the girl immediately realized that something terrible had happened. Alice had never seen Dad in such a state. Pale, disheveled, and with dark circles under his eyes, and his gaze was frighteningly extinguished. The father did not ask, as usual, if his daughter had dinner, did not become interested in lessons, and did not even ask about Alice's well-being. The man sat the girl down in front of him, put his big firm hand on her shoulder, and uttered terrible words. Mom was no longer there at that time. The doctors could not save her. The injuries were too serious. The father had to tell his 9-year-old daughter about it. Years later, Alice realized that it was very difficult for him at that moment. How does it feel to choose the words to tell such terrible news to a small child? Of course, she cried and roared so much that later she couldn't even move her arm or leg. She was so weak. The father silently stroked his daughter's back and head, saying something comforting. It was difficult for him himself. He was barely holding back tears, holding only for his daughter's sake. Horses in the sky. Now Mom is not around. She looks at us from there and sees everything. Mom will also help you. She just won't be very close. These words, spoken by her father in a difficult moment, were firmly sunk into the girl's heart. Alice clutched at them like a drowning man clutching at a straw. It was probably the best thing her father could have done for her back then. Alice has been convinced for a long time that this is the case. Since then, the girl has often looked at the clouds. It seemed to her that her mother could see her face better at that moment. The baby really felt better at the thought that her mother was looking at her, still loved her daughter, and was trying to help her. Now, as a teenager, Alice has almost lost faith in the fact that her mother is watching and looking after them. But the habit of looking at the sky and clouds has not gone away. Once in the shade of the trees that grew in huge numbers in the cemetery, Alice, as always, felt a strange calm. It was a good thing that his father did not have enough money to bury his wife in the new cemetery during that black period, for their small Alice somehow ended up there. It was about 2 years ago. Something wrong with this vaunted and prestigious new cemetery. Too much territory, too many graves and visitors, Two wide paths paved with beautiful coal tiles. It was as if everything was aligned according to a ruler. Clear lines, perfect symmetry, lots of light, and of course no grass or trees. It's better here, cozier and calmer, even more sincere somehow. Sometimes Alice looked at other graves. There were also quite old burials in this quiet cemetery. There were people who were born in the century before last. Alice looked at old photographs, read unusual names that are no longer found. I wondered how these people lived, who they were, what they dreamed of. And here is my mother's grave. Alice now smiled at the monument when she came to visit her mother, and once she could not look at it without tears. Mom smiled from the black stove tenderly and a little sadly, as if she was very sorry that she could not be near her daughter. Alice got down to business. There were always 5 liters of water in the corner next to the fence. The girl carefully made sure that the bottle did not remain empty. Alice brought rags with her. Now she softened the napkin and began to rub the monument as usual. In summer, it quickly became somewhat dusty and dim. Sometimes crows, local residents, also left traces of their vital activity. To wipe the monument, remove dry leaves and debris, which are often carried by the wind, she performed all these actions in winter. There was less work, only to sweep the snow from the monument and occasionally remove the garbage. But Alice still went to her mom's every Sunday just to visit. The girl was so used to it, but it was still hard for Dad to come here. Alice understood this perfectly well. My father's eyes were filled with such pain at the sight of the monument that it was impossible to look at the man. That's why the girl tried to visit her mother and take care of the grave herself. Unlike her parent, it wasn't that difficult for her. But my father came. Of course, he visited his wife. He always brought a luxurious bouquet on her birthday and also carried out general cleaning, did something else, but it hurt him. It was unbearably painful to be in this place, but Alice didn't feel that way. On the contrary, here she felt some kind of acute closeness with her mother and even talked to her, sometimes in a low voice. Then after the tragedy, Alice and her dad were left all alone in the whole wide world. Somehow it turned out that they had no other relatives. My father grew up in an orphanage. Alice knew this from an early age. Dad didn't have any parents. No, somewhere, of course. There were people who gave birth to a baby and immediately left it. Perhaps the father even had brothers and sisters, nieces and nephews, only it was not possible to find out now. My father received an education in an orphanage, graduated from high school and a construction college, and became a certified electrician. After graduating from an orphanage, as an orphan, the boy got a small apartment on the edge of the city in an old house, but his own. He served in the army and got a job, began an independent adult life. It wasn't easy to get used to the fact that he was on his own now, but the smart kid coped with everything. And then one day, my father met a girl. Looking into her eyes, he realized that he was missing. He had never felt this way before, and it was, of course, Alice's mother. Then, of course, the future. The girl has heard the story of her parents' acquaintance, and more than once, her mother also told her about it. It happened on the football field. Alice's father was an avid football player. After work, he chased the ball along with the same football fans of all ages. There were teenagers and very grown-up family people in their team. They were all united by their love of the sports game. These were not professional at all, but bright and emotional matches were watched. There were benches and even mini stands around the football field, which were always full of people. Curious boys, girls sighing for young football players, and just people who were interested in watching the game. And then one day, Anne turned out to be on one of the benches, a girl whom a young graduate of an orphanage noticed from the very beginning. He was hooked by her eyes and a soft, gentle smile. This is a young person who somehow stood out very much from the rest, at least for him. The kid couldn't think about the match that night. His gaze was fixed on that very bench all the time. Sometimes he even made eye contact with the girl who had such an influence on him. The young man kept thinking about how to get to know her and found nothing more original than intentionally sending the ball to that very bench. The girls caught the ball laughing. A resourceful football player ran up to them to pick him up. Everything was going according to his script. The boy then got into conversation with the girl he liked, and she also clearly liked him. They met, then started dating, then got married. only they had to leave for another city because of some problems. Alice still didn't know what those cases were. It seems that something happened to my father's job, or something, but why didn't Mom communicate with her parents? She had a family. Of course, Alice asked these questions to her father and mother. At a certain age, the girl noticed that her friends had grandparents. They gave their grandchildren gifts, cooked delicious pancakes for them, took them to the cinema and the amusement park, and in general just loved and adored their grandchildren. Alice wanted it too. My parents didn't like talking about such topics. The girl, although she was still quite a baby, understood this. The parents, we've become strangers. It happens, my mother explained confusedly. They don't even know that they have such a wonderful granddaughter. So maybe you should tell them. What if you make up then? My mother shook her head sadly. There are situations when nothing can be returned and nothing can be fixed. And what? You and I can become strangers someday too. The girl was amazed at her own conclusions. Not at all. Smiled, she hugged her daughter tightly and added, "We are the dearest in the world. And I also felt like a complete stranger when I was a child. There was no warmth and acceptance between us from the very beginning. Of course I didn't understand this when I was a child. And the three of us, you, me, and Dad, we are the closest and dearest. We will always be there." Alice tried not to bother her mother with questions because she saw that it was unpleasant for her to remember her relatives. Well, then don't. The girl was quite satisfied that in their small family, everyone loves each other very much and always supports a cheerful and strong dad who constantly comes up with something interesting to surprise and please his daughter and wife. An understanding, sensitive mother. What else is needed for happiness? Alice knew the answer to that question. She dreamed of a brother or sister, but her parents explained that they needed to get back on their feet first, become more independent, and only then think about a second child. Alice really wanted this moment to come as soon as possible, but an intoxicated driver crossed out all the plans and hopes of a happy little family. He was quickly found then. There was a trial. The culprit of the accident turned out to be a very young guy, the son of a local deputy. They didn't even put him in jail. Miraculously, it turned out that the brakes had failed in a brand new foreign car. That is, as it were, the accident occurred without the driver's fault. Witnesses claimed that the driver was drunk, but these indications somehow got lost and disappeared. The examination miraculously showed the absence of alcohol in the driver's blood. It is not surprising, given the position and connections of the young guy's father. The parents of the perpetrator of the tragedy paid a small fine and the case was hushed up. My father then tried to achieve justice, appealed to the courts, to the prosecutor's office. He demanded a more thorough investigation, and it was important to him that the culprit suffer at least some punishment. But the man ran into obstacles everywhere. Alice didn't care if the driver was punished or not. She wanted Dad to be around more often during that difficult period, hugging, talking about how Mom was watching them from the clouds, stroking her hair. But the girl often had to stay alone because the parent ran through all sorts of instances in the hope of getting justice. Later, Alice realized that perhaps by taking on a lot of things, he was trying to somehow distract himself from the unbearable pain. It was as if my father had been replaced after the tragedy. He hardly smiled, did not joke, and no longer started noisy fun games with his daughter as it used to be. But Dad started cooking and learned how to braid a girl before school. He was doing a lot of things now that his mother used to do. My father was doing great. But of course, Alice sorely lacked maternal care. As time passed, the girl got used to her new life. My father seemed to have come to his senses too. Now you could sometimes see a wide smile on his face again. Time takes its toll. Anyway, Alice was ready for the fact that one day a new woman would appear in their house. The neighbors talked about it, and friends at school. Yes, the girl herself understood perfectly well that her father had the right to a private life, but he did not even look at other women. My father still missed his wife very much. Alice saw this, and she was worried about her loved one. The girl wanted him to be happy. The life of the daughter and father somehow quickly got better. The girl took over some household duties, the parent. Their house was always clean and smelled of delicious food. The daughter and father made a good team. A couple of times Alice tried to find out from Dad about Mom's parents. Naturally, she had questions. Now more than ever, she wanted to feel like a part of the family, to feel the care and support not only of her father but also of other relatives, and she has them. That's for sure. My father was reluctant to talk about them, that Tweety treated your mother badly. Maybe it wasn't out of spite that they did it, I don't know, but she didn't want to communicate with them, and neither did they. When the tragedy happened, I tried to contact them. I called her mother several times. When she heard my voice, she immediately hung up on me. They don't even know what happened to their daughter. We'll say yes, it's weird. Don't they even care where she is? What's wrong with her? That's exactly what's strange. The father agreed. Once these people just cut their daughter out of their lives simply because she wasn't as comfortable as they would like. Every time he talked about his wife's relatives, his father plunged into dark memories. There was a shadow on his face, and his eyes were filled with longing and sadness. Alice didn't like seeing her father in such a state, so she tried not to bother him with these questions. There was some kind of secret in their family. She understood that, but since it hurt her father so much to remember it, well, she wouldn't insist. Maybe when Alice gets a little older, her father will tell her everything. And right now it looks like her parent is just protecting her from some information. Alice rubbed the monument with vigorous movements. She was completely alone in the cemetery. It happened a lot. Occasionally, the girl met other visitors. During the church holidays, there were a lot of people here. Alice came here for the first time, completely alone, a couple of years ago. Before that, her father took her to the cemetery. But this rarely happened, and the girl wanted to see her mother more often, and my mother loved cleanliness and order so much. Alice thought that her grave needed to be cleaned much more often, but these visits were hard for her father. Besides, he worked a lot and he had other things to do. And then one day the girl herself got on the 6th bus and arrived at a familiar stop. Alice was not afraid to get lost. She already knew the way very well. At first, the girl felt uneasy, alone in the cemetery. Then she felt calm and peaceful. Since then, Alice has been coming here every Sunday. The father, upon learning about his daughter's trips, was surprised but not angry. Beamstreet, aren't you afraid of being alone? Exene, Alice answered honestly. Oh, but at least warn me when you go there. I still need to know where my child is. H. Since then, Alice has always informed her father before going to the cemetery. Sometimes he went with her. Sometimes he passed a bouquet of flowers with his daughter so that she would leave it at the monument. When she finished cleaning, the girl put the water bottle back in place and hung a rag to dry on the fence. Now we need to weed the flowers. Olesia managed to grow bright peonies in the flower garden for the first time. However, the weeds appeared at breakneck speed, so the girl had enough work. But it's nothing. But now my mother had lively and very beautiful, bright flowers. And suddenly, Alice didn't hear a sound. She just felt that someone was looking at her. The girl turned around sharply. People in the cemetery are, in general, a common thing. You never know who comes here to visit relatives, but someone was staring intently at Alice. And this is already strange. The girl met the gaze of sad gray eyes. A woman was staring straight at her. Her face was vaguely familiar. Alice definitely saw her somewhere, probably. The woman looked at the girl with an expression of longing on her face. Tears were streaming down her cheeks, which the stranger did not seem to notice. Alice has often seen similar looks. Many people looked at her with pity. Especially here in the cemetery, people saw a girl cleaning up the grave of a young woman, clearly her mother, and this story touched many. Alice is used to attracting attention, but this is the first time the girl has seen tears and such pain in the eyes of a random passerby. Alice involuntarily backed away from this strange woman. Perhaps the visitor is now acutely experiencing her own. After all, she came to the cemetery. There are flowers in her hands, a bouquet of daisies. By the way, my mother also loved daisies very much, so my father always tried to bring these flowers here. Yes, he often gave her daisies during her mother's lifetime. Alice stammered. She usually didn't talk to other visitors, and they didn't talk to her either. It wasn't accepted somehow, but here this situation is strange. This woman is looking at her too intently. The pause dragged on. You have to say something. Hello? The woman said and smiled. This made her face even more familiar. Perhaps the woman recognized Alice. Maybe it's some friend of Mom's? Do we know each other? The girl clarified. The situation was becoming more and more strange and incomprehensible. The woman was clearly not going to go any further. She looked at Alice, at the picture of her mother on the monument, and couldn't hold back. It was a good thing she wasn't getting any closer, because Alice was already starting to worry. "No, we don't know each other, but I know your mother very well." Or rather, she knew. The woman finally noticed her own tears and feverishly wiped them right on her shirt sleeve. She was clearly trying to pull herself together, so indeed, they were once close. "I came to visit a friend, and Alice is here." What a meeting. This is already interesting. Maybe the visitor will tell Alice something about her mother. The girl has always been interested in this, because she was just a baby when everything happened. "Ooh, so you came to visit your mother?" Alice clarified. The woman nodded. The girl broke into a smile. She was pleased that not only she and her father remembered about her mother. Her friend came with flowers. They must have had a close relationship once. Apparently, she had met this woman before, but she did not remember. For a reason, her face seemed familiar to the girl. Alice stepped aside, letting the woman pass to the monument. "Exit," this lady said with a smile through her tears. She came closer and put flowers at the monument. "I finally found you. However, I had no idea what I would see. I have so much to tell you." Alice decided to leave the woman alone with her grief. It seems that she recently found out about her friend's death. Let her cry calmly, and Alice will go to the garbage pile and take a bag of dry leaves. She will not interfere with this woman. Let her talk, and then they will certainly talk. I wonder why didn't she know about her friend's fate? Does she know anything about Mom's parents? Hundreds of questions were born in Alice's head. We need to pull ourselves together and try not to overwhelm a stranger with them. When Alice returned, the woman already looked almost calm. She looked at the girl and smiling. "You're so grown up," at the stranger said. "How old are you?" 13, a wonderful age. How quickly time flies. It would seem that recently your mother and I were the same age. And now, here, now like this. And how do you know my mother? The woman was confused. The question seemed to take her by surprise. She was obviously choosing her words for an answer. It's kind of weird. Question as a question, CC. NPS get to know each other first. FITAs, the woman suggested. "My name is Irene. And yes, I've known your mother since she was very young, so you're from her hometown. Did she leave there when she and Dad got married?" "Yes, I'm from there." Alice was beaming. "It's so interesting. So Irene should know about Mom's relatives. They seem to be childhood friends, a messenger from the past. Wow, what a stroke of luck that they bumped into each other at the cemetery today. And my name is Alice. Do you know why your mom liked that name so much?" The girl also smiled and nodded. Of course she knew. Her mother had told her about it many times. Mom's favorite childhood book is Alice in Wonderland. "Yes, that's right. She must have read it 100 times. And I watched the cartoon. And Alice named all her dolls, and she made claims to her parents that she was not named Alice. It even happened. Alice was wary. Irene herself started talking about Mom's parents. She obviously knows them, and she knows her mother, and very well. If this is a friend, then without any doubt, a very close one. But why didn't Mom ever talk about her? Alice knew Aunt Sveta, Aunt Tanya. These are my mother's friends and colleagues. They often came to visit them. The girl was friends with their children, but she and her mother never even talked about this Irene. Weirdness after weirdness. "And you? How do you know my mother?" Alice asked. "Oh girl, we need to talk very seriously and thoroughly. Can we go somewhere else? The conversation is long and difficult. There should be peace here." Alice nodded. She completely agreed with this woman. "And have a car nearby," said Irene. "We can drive to some cafe and we'll talk there. And then I'll take you home with me." Alice shook her head negatively. No, she definitely won't sit in a car with a stranger. The woman, catching herself, spoke again. No, I understand everything. Of course you're right not to trust a stranger." "That's right. Well done. It was just out of confusion that I suggested this to you. I didn't think I'd meet you here. It baffled me." "I wasn't ready." Alice smiled. The girl was afraid that the woman would be offended by such distrust, but Irene also praised her for her vigilance. "An adequate response, and Nate's work. First stand nearby," Alice said. "You need to walk along the curb for 150 meters. I saw him, Irina nodded. Let's go for a walk. I generally like to walk, she made doing, Alice admitted. Surprisingly, it was easy and pleasant for her to communicate with a strange woman. And her face, she still felt like she had seen Irene somewhere before. Only where and when, the girl couldn't remember. On the way, they talked about Alice's life. Irina asked the usual questions. What grade does the girl study in? How many friends does she have? What subjects does she like? Alice saw that Irene was really interested in everything about her life. These are not routine questions to keep the conversation going. And the girl was happy to talk about her business. Irina was sincerely glad that Alice was making progress in literature. And when she found out that she became the winner of the city Olympiad among schoolchildren, she was completely delighted. The power of genes, said Irene in incomprehensible phrase to Alice. This woman generally raised a lot of questions from the girl. Alice planned to receive answers to them in the very near future. Finally, the girl and the woman reached the cafe, a cozy place, appreciated Irene. Alice nodded. She had never been here, but she constantly saw the cafe from the bus when she went to the cemetery. The girl did not think that she would ever become a visitor to this institution. Where are we going to sit? Irina asked. Alice shrugged her shoulders. What's the difference? And then Irina chose a table by the window herself. Alice and Irene sat on comfortable chairs opposite each other. The waiter, a charming, smiling guy, immediately approached them. Probably a student or a high school student on a side job. What will you have? Irene glanced at Alice. The girl was embarrassed. It was already kind of awkward and uncomfortable. Irene understood everything. Don't be shy. We have a long conversation, and I guarantee that you will soon forget about any embarrassment. It won't be up to that. Intrigued, Alice admitted. Irina ordered herbal tea and 2 cakes. Alice followed the woman with interest, who seemed to know a lot about her mother. Irene smiled at the waiter when he brought the order. It was obvious that she was very worried and did not know where to start. Alice looked at her expectantly. The girl's heart was pounding wildly. Father, do you have a good relationship with your father? Irina asked suddenly. And good ones, Alice answered honestly. Father, this is her only family member. He works a lot. He still hasn't gotten over his grief. But Dad tries so hard to make his daughter's life happy and joyful. It is impossible not to notice and appreciate it. It's a pity that Father doesn't joke and smile like he used to. No, he's trying, but it's still not the same. Alice hoped that her old father would return one day. Light, humorous, and funny. He just needs more time. I had no doubt. EA smiled Irene. Anthony has always been wonderful. It's a pity that it wasn't obvious to everyone in the family. Alice nodded. She looked at Irina and waited for the promised truth. And Dad, did he tell you something about Mom's family? Very little. I realized that there had been some kind of major quarrel, but I still don't understand what it was about. I used to be small and somehow I didn't care. And now, after what happened with Mom, it hurts him to talk about it. I'm not bothering to ask him yet. You are a very wise and sensitive girl. Irina sighed sadly. Poor Anthony. He loved Anna so much, more than himself, more than life. How is he holding? He's trying. I think there is your merit here. Smiled Irene, and then she suddenly began her long-awaited story. Alice sometimes forgot to breathe in the process of her narration. The story captured the girl so much. 2 sisters lived in a wonderful small town, SEAA. This is how Irene began her long story. Girls were born into a wealthy family. Their father was a successful and very well-known businessman in the city, a monopolist of some kind. Mother worked as a chief accountant at a large factory. However, after giving birth to 2 daughters, one after the other, she left the post. It was a mutual wish of the spouses. Someone had to take care of the children. Alice smiled. For some reason, she immediately realized that one of the girls had her mother. Sisters were never denied anything in their childhood. They lived with their parents in a beautiful country house, a large garden, a private playground with swings and carousels, a swimming pool, even a small tree house. All the girls' wishes were fulfilled almost instantly. An expensive toy from the store, Choose anyone. A dress for a matinee from a branded boutique at the price of an average salary by the standards of your hometown. Yes, please. The girls were taken to resorts. They traveled a lot with their parents around the country, and the birthday parties resembling fairy tale balls were arranged for them. Both lived in an atmosphere of universal love and acceptance, like two little princesses. The eldest of the sisters was named Irene, the young Anne. The difference between the girls was only a year. No wonder the little ones were so interested. They were best friends together. The sisters played all day long in their house, the castle, and they were quite happy with each other's company. The girls were never bored. The parents also dreamed of a son, but childbirth with such a small interval adversely affected the mother's health. She could no longer have children, although she was treated by the best doctors in the country. Irene and Anne knew about this problem because their father often reproached their mother for not being able to give him an heir. He called her defective right in front of us. Mom didn't argue. She never contradicted her father at all, and it was difficult for him to object. Only we didn't understand it then. Our father loved us, pampered us, hugged us, smiled at us. Accordingly, we also adored him with blind, childish love. The father really wanted a son, it's true. Then I found out that when Anne was born and not the son, he blamed the mother for this, shouted at her right on the day of birth. But Anne's father loved. It's hard to argue with that. He simply adored both of his daughters and accepted the girls completely while they were toddlers. The mother was the closest person to Irene and Anne. Soft, dear, taciturn, ready to fulfill all whims and desires to the jocks. You could say anything to her. She never argued with anything. It was the nanny who kept order. Many tricks didn't work with her. You couldn't eat the cake before the soup or go to bed late at night, and Mom allowed her daughters to do everything. How can I refuse you? She smiled in response to any request from the girls. Then, years later, the mother admitted that she just wanted to prolong the happy period of her baby's life. She knew that when the daughters grew up, they would have to face their father's despotism, and he would command his daughters in the same way as his wife. And there's nothing you can do about it. Who was the father to the kids in their early childhood? Someone distant, but loving and omnipotent. The girls knew that everything, absolutely everything, was in his power. It is he who creates the world for his family with his own hands. The girls were both afraid of him and loved him at the same time. The father was kind to his little daughters, but they always felt his cruelty and strength, and therefore tried to please the parent, make him smile, make the father's eyes light up with happiness. It could have been anyone with the girl's mother, but her father's favor still had to be earned. The little ones have felt this since they were very young. But time passed, the girls grew up, and now it was time to go to school. The age difference allowed the sisters to be sent to the same class. It's just that Irene started studying at 7.5 years old, and Anne, respectively, at 6.5. That's what my father decided. He thought it was a great idea to put his daughters in the same class. The mother tried to object. It was a rare case when she did not unconditionally agree with her husband's opinion. And just a kid, what kind of studies does she have? She should be dancing, painting, playing with dolls all day long. But objections, as always, were not accepted. There's nothing to suffer from nonsense for another year. My father replied confidently, let them start learning too. Irina is nearby. She will help if anything.
The beginning of school coincided with the end of the sisters' happy childhood. No, the girls just liked studying. They were sent to a prestigious gymnasium with attentive, sensitive teachers and beautiful, state-of-the-art classrooms. It was interesting and exciting to be inside the walls of this institution. But now the father made serious demands on his daughters. The little ones had to go out of their way to meet the ideals of a strict parent. Unconditional love was out of the question. Irene and Anne were supposed to receive top marks, and they were also required to participate and win school Olympiads, engage in scientific projects, be the best students in the class, and also shine with athletic success. My father dreamed of perfect children. He did a lot to achieve his goal. From the very first grade, the girls were tutored in English and mathematics, and the little ones now attended many sections: swimming, choreography, the Center for Foreign Languages, But no one cancelled school either. Lessons, tests, projects. The girls here were supposed to be the best. Irina and Anne were taken to these additional classes by their mother and nanny. My father only inquired about the results and appeared at competitions from time to time. Irina still remembered how she cried at the first swimming tournament. She and Anne then came in the top 5, but did not take prizes. The girls were happy. They were very proud of themselves. In training, the little ones showed much worse results, but at the competitions they gave their best. But my father, who came to the tournament, looked disappointed. He needed medals. He looked at his little daughters with reproach then. "Couldn't you have tried harder?" The man curled his lips contemptuously. They both seemed to have taken after their mother. But if there was a son, he would show everyone. My mother, who was sitting next to me, was silent as always. She did not even think to stand up for her daughters. It was only when she got older that Irina realized that her mother did not interfere in order not to anger her husband even more. If she had said a word, he would have spoken even more insulting words to his wife and to his already upset daughters. Irina was crying with resentment at the time. Not in front of my parents, no. My father did not allow any signs of weakness. The girl was crying in her room. Anne sat next to her and patted her older sister on the back. She has always been stronger and more free inwardly. From an early age, the character of the youngest was noticeable. It was difficult to offend or annoy her. It was not easy for the girls to meet their father's high expectations. Over time, they learned, like their mother, to present the truth in a way that suited him. I had to dodge, cheat, but so what? The main thing is that the parent is satisfied. It's calmer for everyone. My father became more and more rigid and demanding. It was important to him that his children bypass children, friends and partners in everything. Soka may not have a son, but my daughters will give everyone a head start. The man said with satisfaction when Irene or Anne reported to him about their next victory. The sisters always had to outrun and outperform someone, an endless race. "It's a good thing we don't have a brother," Anne said more than once. "But he would definitely have a hard time." I nodded. My sister was right. My father had so many plans and hopes for an heir who had never been born that hardly anyone could withstand such a burden. It was hard for them, just girls. What can we say about the heir? The girls still had everything they wanted: beautiful outfits, travel, pocket money. But freedom was sorely lacking. My father controlled all areas of their activities. The man spent a lot of time at work, but nevertheless managed to limit the freedom of his daughters. He had a lot of levers for this: babysitters, tutors, a wife finally. The father decided what his daughters would do. For a long time, he tried to make cool programmers out of Irene and Anne. Eminent teachers were hired for girls. They attended many different courses, but the girls never began to figure out how much time they spent trying to delve into the science beyond their control. But all this, despite great efforts, remained for the sisters a Chinese letter. The father was angry, very angry, called his daughters stupid and lazy, demanded results. He did not pay attention to the girls' words that they were trying very hard, but nothing was coming out. Even the opinion of the programming teachers was not authoritative. He believed that they were just trying to lure out as much money as possible. Talking about the futility of further studies, they were stuffing the price. So Anne and Irene had to deal with a hateful and completely incomprehensible case every day for 2 years. It was hard and hurtful. Anne would have dreamed of attending a choreography class at this time. She was good at it. The girl ploughed across the stage like a light butterfly. Irene, and not only her, admired the graceful movements of the young dancer. The choreographer said that this girl has a great future. But dancing, in my father's opinion, is so frivolous. And I don't care that my daughter dreams about the stage.
The choreography is good for general development. The head of the family repeated that it's still not worth getting too involved in this business. You need a serious profession that will make you rich, and these are dancing. It's all nonsense. My father also spoke about the hobby of Irene. She drew beautifully from an early age, but she had absolutely no time for art school, so the girl had to educate herself. Fortunately, there were already many video courses at that time. The girl did not experience a lack of educational information. On the internet, Irene's drawings caused a furor. The girl was a member of special interest communities. It was very pleasant to receive the approval and compliments of strangers. The mother modestly praised her daughter's work. After all, she knew her husband's opinion about the hobby of Irene. "Fool can draw a picture," the parent said. "You don't need a lot of intelligence for this. But such an occupation will not feed anyone either. If something happens to me, I will lose my business and the poor artist will starve to death. No, it's better to try. Become a programmer and then be a sought-after specialist. It's just a pity. Both of them are lazy and do not want to study. They do not appreciate the funds that I invest in them." In his own way, the father tried to protect his daughters, to give them a life start, and therefore demanded such unquestioning. That's why he did it, so that they had absolutely no time for the girl's passion, for what they really liked. After all, dancing and painting pictures will not feed anyone. It's just a useless pastime. The girls didn't turn out to be programmers. As a result, my father had to admit that time and money were wasted. The sisters were incredibly relieved the day they were allowed to stop programming. Only now their father has prepared new challenges for that. Now both girls were supposed to become cool economists. New classes have begun. Well, it wasn't what Irene and Anne dreamed of, but it was still much simpler and clearer. The father was really always in fear.
He was afraid of losing his business, his big house, his position in society. The man understood that this could happen sooner or later. There were examples of acquaintances in front of his eyes. He didn't want to end up in poverty again and live like he did in his youth. My father built his empire from scratch. The business world is cruel. Probably, in the struggle for financial well-being, he had to become so categorical. The man believed that he knew how everything should be. He and only he should choose what his children will do. Disputes and discontent, disagreement and other opinions. All this was perceived as a betrayal, as a threat to the safety of the family, and therefore was severely suppressed. Irina looked like her mother. She also considered her father to be almost a deity on whom the life of their family depended. If the father thinks so, then it is a priori correct. He's so strong, so domineering. He has tremendous experience. He is respected and feared by people. My father spends a lot of money, takes risks, spends a lot of time in the office, literally lives by work. Who are they next to this outstanding man? He must be obeyed, and his orders must be obeyed without question. But Anne, she was always different. She was not satisfied with this kind of life. In childhood, Anne was the only one from the family who was not afraid to enter into an open confrontation with her father. She tried to convey her opinion to the parent, gave reasonable arguments, argued with him, sometimes driving the man to white heat. He got angry, lost his temper, resorted to punishments. The punishments were mainly expressed in restrictions. For example, Anne was forbidden to watch TV, go to her favorite choreography, or eat sweets. For a certain time, of course, there was no talk of meeting with friends. The girls rarely communicated with their peers. There was simply no time for this. But at least sometimes she and her classmates went to the cinema or went for a walk in the park. Both sisters loved these meetings outside of home and school, but their father easily deprived the rebellious Anne of the desired entertainment. This was especially hard for her to bear. It's been worse. If her father lost his temper completely, he forbade Anne to even leave her room. Accordingly, Irina was not allowed to visit her sister to talk to her or comfort her. Neither was the mother allowed to do this. It happened that Anne spent 2 or 3 days in such confinement. Even food was brought to the room. The father was afraid of his younger daughter's love of freedom and disobedience. He said more than once that Anne and the whole family could have serious problems because of this. "Your stupid, stubborn character will ruin you," the father exclaimed, cursing with his obstinate daughter. And Irina was afraid. I was afraid for my sister, for her future. She felt sorry for Anne, who had to be a prisoner in her own house so often. Anne wondered in response to her older sister's words. "But Dell, I don't know. Yes, he makes me sit in this room, but at least sometimes I say what I think and do what I want. You and Mom are much more a prisoner of that house and father. And at first, Irina did not understand what her sister was talking about. What kind of prisoner is she? It's Anne who can't leave the room, but she, Irene, is free right now, even this minute, to go outside and go, for example, to the store. Just hurry up, because after an hour of classes at the School of Economics, the driver will pick her up soon. Only then did I realize that her sister was right. And after all, Anne really got free in the end. Really? At what cost? But, apparently, for her, freedom was more expensive than comfort and good relations with her parents and even communication with her older sister. Most offensively, Anne allowed herself a lot. She could easily skip extra classes to go to the movies with friends from school. Yes, perhaps later the father will find out about everything and punish, but that will be later. For Anne, momentary freedom was more important. Was it worth it to do this, to be locked up for 2 days now? Asked Irina, standing under the door of the room. Steady was worth it, Anne confidently declared. We walked around the city, and then we sat and watched the movie together and laughed. They laughed so hard that the walls in the cinema were shaking. Then we wandered around the park and chatted about everything, and I felt so good, so much fun. It was definitely worth it. Come with us next time. But Irene never violated her father's prohibitions as a child. She was an obedient and very comfortable daughter. It was important to her that her father considered her good, that he loved and respected her. And the father really often set Irene as an example for his youngest daughter. Said and will achieve a lot. The father shared his opinion with his wife. She knows what she wants, and she always stubbornly goes to her goal, just not to miss it now. That's why I'm so strict with her, that with such a character you can achieve unprecedented heights, as well as get into huge trouble. We need to keep an eye on her until she grows up, and then it will surprise us all very pleasantly. Irina was offended to hear that. It turned out that the father had big plans for Anne, and despite the ugly behavior of his younger daughter, her parents appreciated and respected her more. And she, Irene, who tries to obey her parents in everything and not upset them, seems to be in the shadow of her younger freedom-loving sister. They don't even expect anything special from her. Irina sometimes envied Anne, because her father clearly loved his younger daughter more. And Anne could also afford to do and say what she wanted. Not always, of course, but still within certain limits. But still, Irina was not capable of even a small part of what her sister was doing, and sometimes I wanted it so much. In early childhood, Irene and Anne were best friends. But the girls grew up, their interests and behavior changed. The sisters were all estranged. Irina was very upset by this fact. She adored Anne and wanted to be like her in many ways, although she understood that this was impossible in principle. Her sister was her idol, her hope. Anne, of course, also loved her sister, but it was much more interesting for her to communicate with friends and girlfriends, of whom she always had a lot. But Irina did not have such a circle of communication. She always obeyed her father, and he did not encourage idle time. So Irina spent hours studying economics textbooks, instead of, like Anne, deceiving her parents going out with friends. My sister's life was attractive, but it seemed dangerous. Irina was afraid of many things. Disapproval of parents, harsh teenage jokes, trouble. After all, that could happen to children on the street. But Anne was not afraid of anything. She was looking forward to her coming of age so that she could finally start living the way she wanted to. Will immediately drop out of university and get a job, undreamed, thinking about the future. As his father will kill you, te Irena warned. Me will officially become an adult, an independent person, and smiled. What will he?
When the girls graduated from school, their father assigned them, as planned, to a prestigious university of economics. Irina liked studying. Thanks to her excellent training, she quickly became the best student in the course, which earned her father's approval and, on the other hand, made an average living, especially without bothering to study. The girl, having escaped at least partially from the control of a strict parent, enjoyed student life, and she looked quite happy and contented at that time. To Irene's surprise, she didn't care about the not-too-high grades at all, and made a mistake with the fact that, as an adult, she would get out of her father's control. He wasn't going to let her go until her daughter got an education. Irina suspected that later he would control the lives of his daughters in the same way. The father had a clear plan for the children. The girls get a diploma, get a job with him, become co-founders of his company, then marry young people who will also be approved by the father. Irina knew that these would be the sons of his partners, as the father dreamed of strengthening his empire, and the eldest daughter had nothing against it. Anne, too, was already sufficiently taught by bitter experience at that time not to enter into an open confrontation with her father. The girl did not drop out of university, as she once dreamed of. She tried, but her father quickly put her back in her. He then shouted at his youngest daughter so that the glass in the windows shook. Irina locked herself in her room and covered her ears with her hands, just not to hear all this. But she still caught every word. One night, she often ran away from home to go to a club with friends and at least take her soul away there. She couldn't completely obey her strict parent. And Irene, she was trying to reason with her younger sister. After all, if her father finds out that she is cheating, he will really put her in a hospital. The father is ready for anything, if only everyone obeys him. I almost don't care, Anne smiled sadly. I already live almost like in prison. If there are not at least these rare sips of freedom, I do not know what will happen to me. I can't live like this. Irina understood that sooner or later a real disaster would break out. A despotic father and a freedom-loving daughter both have strong characters. There will be storms, and so it turned out in the end. But a little later, after Anne met Anthony, the father took care of the family future of his daughters when they were still in school. Almost since she was a teenager, Irina knew who she would marry when the time came. Victor, the son of his father's partner, he was older than her. Tall, thin, with a charming smile and intelligent, thoughtful eyes. In general, Irina had nothing against such a party. At first, it was the jokes of adults at the table saying, "We have a merchant, you have goods," but the father gradually prepared the eldest daughter for the fact that she would have to connect her life with Victor. In one fell swoop, 2 goals at once. The children of wealthy families acquired a decent second half, and their fathers pooled cash. Of course, Irina was a little embarrassed next to Victor, and he also seemed to be embarrassed, but on the whole, the couple formed quite easily and naturally. Victor took the first step towards the future bride. As befits a man, he invited a girl to the cinema. Irene gladly agreed. Finally, she will go to the city with her boyfriend and go about her business. Not everyone can run. Only Irene gets official permission from her father for this walk. Importantly, she doesn't have to sneak out of the house and then censor. The relationship developed like a textbook.
Flowers, dates, compliments, kisses. Sympathy flared up between the young people. Well, all this was soon followed by the expected offer. It was both interesting and very exciting for Irene. What does it feel like to live not with your parents? How does it feel to be your own mistress? The girl is used to relying on the opinion and authority of her father, and here he will not be around. Will Victor be able to become such a strong and reliable wall? He doesn't look that influential or strong.
Maybe Head has everything ahead of him. On the eve of the wedding, Anne was sincerely happy for her sister. "I see that you are really head over heels in love with this Victor of yours," she smiled. "You're right about that." Irina did not deny it, and that's great. "I also want to experience something like this someday. But what about these friends of yours with whom you go to the club, then to the cinema?" Irina was genuinely surprised. Anne has already had several light affairs that took place in front of, or rather, in the ears of her older sister.
To dream of a real feeling that blows the roof off. Irene got married and moved with her husband to a huge apartment in the city centre, which was given to the young by their parents. And she began a completely new life. It turns out that living under her father's wing, Irina missed a lot. The parent protected his daughters from everything, because the girl in her early 20s did not even imagine how fun and interesting life could be. Victor literally opened up a new world to his young wife. They went to clubs together, walked the streets of the city until morning, and had parties at home.
It was fun and exciting. Irina even began to understand her younger sister. That's what attracts her. That's where she's always running away to. Meanwhile, Anne, like her older sister, worked as an economist at one of her father's companies. She was good at it. But Anne often told Irene that it wasn't hers. I would like to work with people, maybe even with children. And here are the numbers papers reports. It feels like I'm doing useless work. And why useless? We help my father run the business, argued Irene. She just liked this kind of work. She was happy to delve into reports, unravel complex schemes, and look for errors. It's so on the one hand, it's calm. On the other, it's fascinating. And working with people? Well, no, she's too unpredictable, too nervous, too expensive. And then Anne somehow subtly changed. Irene, who knew her better than others, immediately realized that her sister had some kind of secret, that something was wrong with her sister. One day, when Anne came to visit her older sister, Irene asked her questions that had been of interest to her for a long time. What's going on with you? I can see that something has happened. Come on, tell me. Anne looked at her sister and couldn't help but smile. She illuminated her beautiful face with an inner light, making the already regular features even more attractive. It was like magic. Irina even gasped.
So you're right, sis. You really have a diamond eye, and intoned a little. Yes, I have some news. I met a man, a guy, and finally fell in love. Exactly as I once dreamed. To the point of dizziness, butterflies in the stomach, and other romantic nonsense. Wow! Irina exclaimed. She didn't know whether to be happy for her sister or worried. It is unlikely that the tedious Sergio, the son of his father's companion, whom both old friends had long been looking forward to as Anne's fiancé.
However, the bride did not take these conversations seriously. She considered them jokes and teased him. But Irina knew that. She knew her father wasn't joking. Sooner or later, he will force Anne to marry this Sergio. It was hard to imagine a more harmonious couple. I still can't believe that we met. It's such an accident. This acquaintance could easily not have happened. But we met, and now I'm happy and shared her joy. Irene was smiling, but she was uneasy in her heart. Meanwhile, Anne was talking about her new friend. People are usually happy to talk about those they love. That's how it was with the younger sister of Irene. Hearing about the chosen one, Irene became more and more tense. No, my father would never approve of such a choice. Well, Anne will definitely not give up and will not submit to the will. What will happen? The guy's name was Anthony. Irina didn't really understand how they met. Anne did not stop at this point. Much more enthusiastically, she talked about the youngest person. She and her friend went to watch a yard match. Alice began to tell. She was pleased that she could contribute to this story, add the missing piece to the puzzle. Irene did not know at least some of what Alice knew. To Anthony, my dad, he noticed her and, to get to know her, threw a ball at the girls. That's how it happened. It was a pure accident. Irene shook her head. Sir In told the truth. This meeting might not have happened at all. It must be fate. After learning the facts of her chosen one's biography, Irina grabbed her head. A handsome and charming graduate of an orphanage, who recently graduated from college and served in the army, the owner of a tiny apartment in the most remote and unfavorable area of the city, an employee of a local factory earning pennies, no housing, no relatives and prospects. Such a son-in-law did not appear to his father even in terrible dreams. Irina was initially worried that Anthony, the most ordinary Alphonse. My father warned that, as children of wealthy parents, they might sooner or later encounter such personalities on the way. But then, when Irina saw Anthony, she realized that she was worried in vain. The young man was genuinely in love with her sister. It was in his eyes, in every gesture. He would put his arm around Anne's shoulders or take her hand with such tenderness. It was simply impossible to play it. The guy, on the contrary, tried to hide his feelings from others. It is clear that he was a modest and simple man, direct, sincere, ready to do anything for his beloved. Anthony made a pleasant impression on Irina. Yes, her sister would really be happy with such a person. Only this union will never happen. Well, they'll meet for a while. Then, when my father finds out about the affair, he'll quickly put an end to everything. His parents had completely different plans for the fate of their youngest daughter, and lately he had been talking about them out loud more and more often. I'm going to marry you to Sergio and breathe easy. my father joked, glancing at Anne, and then let him suffer with you. It didn't sound too serious, but the head of the family was really going to give his daughter to the son of a companion. Everyone knew about it, including Anne, who in no way, and replied in the same joking tone, "Not Sergio. I'd rather spend my whole life in girls than be the wife of such a boor." The father immediately began to paint the merits of the future son-in-law and marriage with him in general. My father wasn't wrong about that. Sergio was really grasping and strong. Next to him, Anne would have lived almost the same way as with her parent. The girl would have to become like her muff, a silent, submissive woman who warns her husband's every desire and is afraid to cause his displeasure. But Anne is not like that at all. She can't live like this. Irina understood this perfectly well. Anne would never marry Sergio, no matter how much her father insisted and persuaded her, especially now that she has Anthony. They are so happy together. Young people really look very organic, like two halves of one whole. Irina was worried about the whole situation. My father talked more and more about the upcoming wedding as if it was a done deal. Anne argued with him, tried to explain that it was not the Middle Ages when parents did not ask their children's consent to marriage. The parent got angry, tried to convey to the younger daughter that he knew better how to act in such cases. I'm tired of my opinion not being taken into account even in such matters. I am already an adult, an accomplished person. You're nobody without me. It's good that you have an education, a job, a place to live. These are yours. It's all thanks to me. Where would you be if it wasn't for Rich Daddy? I washed the floors in the entrances. I would shift papers in the office for pennies and pull money to paycheck. Everything you have is my merit, he said. I don't have the main thing, freedom. I feel like I'm in prison all the time. And even now, such scandals were happening more and more often in the house. Anne hoped to bring her father to reason, to convey her point of view to him, but she only made it worse. The parents decided that they needed to hurry up with the wedding and even began preparation. It seemed to Irene then that the father had much more respect and sympathy for Sergio than for his own daughter. Anne herself blabbed to her father about her relationship with Anthony. It happened in the heat of another quarrel. You've never considered anyone's opinion. You didn't care about the feelings of other family members. Anne accused the parent. He insisted on an early wedding again.
I'm responsible for you. That's why I control everything I can. I think it's so easy, especially when you have a rebellious and disobedient daughter like you.
Sir, and you're just used to having everyone obey you and continue to argue. Rena would like to go up to her sister at this moment. Take her by the hand. Take her somewhere. Doesn't she realize that she's only making it worse? Her every cross word makes her father tighten his grip more and more. But Anne didn't seem to be afraid of him anymore. She said all the things to his face that she had wanted to say for a long time, but did not dare. She accused her parent of total control and even called him a tyrant. The wedding is in exactly 1 month. My father finally said in a tone that made it clear to everyone that this was how it would be. I see that you urgently need a steady hand. Sergio is the man who can handle you, I'm sure of it. And I'm not going anywhere near this man. There's no getting away. I'll run away then. I have a man I love, and he loves me. We will definitely be together. Whether you want it or not, it doesn't matter at all. Your opinion, you see, has dissipated. His father had already heard everything he needed to hear, and there was a flicker of alarm in his eyes. Well, who is he? The parent inquired in a calmer tone. So you won't know that for sure. Anne shook her head. I just said in my heart, just a friend. It doesn't matter. Anne tried desperately to fix the situation, but it was difficult to hide the truth from her father. After all, he was a good judge of people, and now he managed to notice that his youngest daughter was really dating someone, and this relationship is very serious. Of course, my father found out about Anthony. Apparently, he introduced someone to follow Anne, maybe even hired a detective. He'll be fine. In general, the parents soon had enough comprehensive information about the guy as an orphan, without money, without a proper home. Of course, my father was furious. He decided that Anne had simply decided to annoy him. That's why I chose the most unsuitable person imaginable, and she should have met a homeless man. My father said with a wicked grin one day after a family dinner. Victor, Iren's husband, went on a long business trip, so the woman returned to her parents' house for a while. She wanted to somehow support Anne during this difficult period for her. Who would doubt it? You've poked your nose into my life again, Anne sighed. Now that you know everything, I can probably leave.
I've been wanting this for a long time. Go away. Unexpectedly, my father agreed calmly. Leave right now in what you're wearing. You won't take any things with you. No expensive jewelry, no branded clothes, no mobile phone, which costs more than your beggar's apartment. Because I bought all this for you, and you don't respect me. You don't appreciate me, so, of course, Anne nodded, getting up from the table. I'll just go up to the room and get the documents. I have a right to them.
Accordingly, you will not work in my company from tomorrow either, continued the father. Spin as you like, since you're so mature and smart. Anne nodded again silently. Then I went up to my room, quickly collected my documents, and went down. Thank you for finally understanding me. She smiled at her father. Maybe someday we will be able to communicate again as a daughter and father.
Anne is gone. She went to Anthony's. They started a life together. The girl got a job as a teacher at an elementary school. I had to take special training courses, but according to the girl, she even enjoyed studying, and she was really excited about her job. Henheim's so happy. Anne shared with her sister, and Honey and I support each other in everything. He is so sensitive, so attentive. He's working hard for me. Everyone worries that I had a better life with my father. He doesn't understand anything yet. I'm only really happy now. I am happy with my loved one, and finally, I am free.
And also really liked the new job. She wanted to work with people, especially children. She liked to see the return on her labors, liked to make others happier. And now, finally, Anne felt in her place. But Irina did not think that her father would leave her sister alone. She often saw her parent in a gloomy mood and understood perfectly well who was responsible for all these experiences. No, Dad won't put up with it and won't really let Anne go. He still hopes that his daughter will crawl to him to ask for forgiveness, having failed the ordeal of poverty. But this did not happen, and the father began to get angry. One day, Irene overheard a conversation between a parent and an old friend, and this dialogue confirmed her guesses and suspicions. Dane, the head of the local police department, came to visit them one day for a cup of coffee. Nothing special. It happened a lot. Mother, as always, set a beautiful table. The old friend sat for a while and then went to their father's office. Irina spent the night with her parents again. Victor's business trips have become too frequent. He was developing a new project, so he had to travel to different cities, and Irina did not like to be alone. Irina sat in the living room, in front of the TV for a while, and then went to her room. Her path led past her parents' office. That's why she became a casual witness to that conversation. No, Irina has never been seen to be overly curious before. The men were talking in low voices about some of their business, and Irina would have passed by if she hadn't suddenly heard her sister's name. This made her stop and listen. I thought she would come crawling in a month ago. My father shared with a friend. This goat lives as if everything suits her in poverty, with some beggar and rootless, with a sweet paradise and in a hut. Simon thoughtfully remarked, she's just stupid. She is still young. She does not understand that she is ruining her fate with her own hands. It's also true, Simon agreed. He always agrees with his father because he sponsored many of his projects. It all ended with the fact that the father asked a friend to put his daughter's faithful in prison. She knew that her father always achieves his goals, but at such a price. Is he really ready to put an honest man in jail just to get his way? Irina suddenly felt desperately sorry for Anthony. He doesn't deserve this. This sincere, kind guy shouldn't end up in jail. You can't do that. But what to do? Simon will do whatever his father tells him. This man owes too much to his old friend. It's possible, friend Simon replied, as if to confirm Irene's thought. Back in her room, Irene immediately dialed her sister's number and told her everything. Subsequently, Irina thought more than once about how she should have acted in that situation and always came to the conclusion that she had done everything right. If Anthony had been imprisoned, she would probably have had to return home. Her father would have achieved her obedience because he would have held Anthony hostage. Anne would have married Sergio with threats and persuasions, would have stayed in the city, would have been nearby. And it so happened that Irene deprived herself of her closest person, her own sister, with her own hands. Because the very next day, Anne and Anthony disappeared from the city. They just disappeared. And yet Irene felt that she had done everything wrong. But my sister is happy. For her, it's so important to have a loved one nearby, an interesting, though not prestigious job. Thank you so much for the warning, Anne said after listening to Irene. You have always been a loyal and reliable person. If Anthony had been put in jail, I would have followed him. We would both be unhappy. And now we need to escape from the city, and urgently. We probably won't see each other for a long time now. As where to run to, Irene was scared. It was only now beginning to dawn on her that she and her sister were breaking up for many years. I don't know that yet, in reply, and C and I have yet to resolve this, but we can't stay here. There's no way. Actually, there is nothing holding us here. This phrase is unpleasantly scratched. Irene, how is it? Nothing holds. What about her, the older sister? Suggest you. It's just a pity to part with you, as if reading Irene's mind, and added, this was the last conversation the sisters had. However, Irene did not know this at the time. It seemed to her that this was simply impossible. Sooner or later, he and Anne will meet, and everything will be fine again, but not fate. Father, he was furious when he found out they were missing. Irene looked at Alice sadly. Ed, he searched for them, hired detectives, reported them to the police. He put everyone on their ears, but Anne and Anthony seemed to have disappeared. No trace, nothing, no wonder. As I found out quite recently, they have gone very far. Apparently, they were scared and even changed the documents. Looking for this couple in our vast country is like looking for a needle in a haystack. My father had to accept it. It was hard to believe that a person accustomed to total submission would not give up so easily at once. He's been trying to find Anne for years, but he and Anthony hid well and were apparently happy because Anne didn't get it. So everything was fine with her. She probably would have liked to talk to me, but she was afraid. Anne knew what kind of man our father was, and she was happy to escape from his influence. She started a new life. Is this really true? Alice blinked in confusion. What she had heard did not want to fit into her head. Mom rarely talked about her family, and I was too young to find out about it. This is interesting to me now. I was going to look into this issue in the future. It's true, only now has the father changed. They found a disease in him. He has nothing left. No amount of connections and money helps in such situations. He rethought a lot on the threshold of eternity and realized how wrong he was. He is very tormented by the story of her father wants to apologize in time, and he plans to apologize to Anthony too. Now he's just a sick old man who needs to see his daughter before he dies and admit he's wrong. And my father asked me to find my sister. I couldn't refuse his request, especially since I've missed my sister for a long time and nothing threatens her anymore. Anne would be glad to know about it. And so, how did you do it? Alice asked. After all, you said yourself, even the detectives couldn't cope. Even the professionals didn't track down my parents, but you could, and I hired new detectives who couldn't cope either. And then chance played its part again. I came across a photo on the internet. There, the teacher and her class posed against the background of some hills. Yes, your mother was there. She has changed over the years, but I recognized her. Probably one of the children posted the photo on a social network. I followed the link and found out the city and Anne's new place of work. However, I could not find the page of my sister or Anthony. They do not use social networks. Of course, they were afraid that their father would find them that way. He was really a very scary person back then. It's his fault for what happened to Mom. Alice clenched her fists under the table. Irene sighed, but did not object. Everyone makes mistakes, and the woman shook her head. As long as a person is alive, he can fix them. There is always a chance. He's alive, but Mom's not it. How will he ask her for forgiveness now? I'm afraid this news will finish him off. I could barely stand it myself when I found out about what happened to Anne.
I haven't told them yet. They are hoping, waiting. It's good to have you. You're like a ray of light, hope incarnate. I think it will be easier for him if he apologizes at least to you and Anthony. Of course, if he wants to talk to him at all.
Alice stared intently at Irene's face. She finally understood why this woman seemed so familiar to her. After all, the girl saw almost the same facial features every day in the mirror. Aunt and niece looked like two peas in a pod.
Now, my mother's words became clear. Alice remembered how sometimes her mother looked at her for a long time and carefully with a smile on her lips. Then she repeated that her daughter looked incredibly like a very good person, so that's who she meant, the older sister. When Alice got older, her mother would definitely tell her about everything. But the tragedy claimed her life, and the mystery remained a mystery, and it was too painful for my father to remember the past. It is unknown when it will leave. If it wasn't for Irene, Alice would have been in the dark.
The girl suddenly reached out to Irene in a fit. She understood her aspirations and hugged Alice tightly. And so they sat. Irene stroked her niece's hair. The girl snuggled closer to her loved one, and this gesture was so natural, so ordinary, as if Alice and Irene had known each other all their lives. The girl felt that she had another close and dear person, and the realization made tears run down her cheeks.